Chapter 25. Daybreak. Chapter 25. Daybreak. Human feet trampled over the shrubbery. As though it had smelled something, the hound nudged aside the branches and leaves with its snout and pawed at the ground. Shinzachuan was doused with dirt all over his neck. Moving up or down were both out of the question, so he could only remain frozen in position. Xiao Qie felt even more uncomfortable. This posture made it hard for him to loosen up. Every single moment, he was in constant contact with firm, delicate skin. The man riding on his body was not a person at all, but a mass of clouds enveloping him like wet mist, ubiquitous and all-pervasive. This atmosphere whipped him up. The place he had not relieved for a long time remained in high spirits. It was so hard he just wanted to take a cold shower right at once. Raindrops splashed his hair wet. In this endless stalemate, Xiao Qie finally regained some of his strength. His fingers twitched as the sense of numbness slowly receded. The man above their heads finally moved away, but Shinzachuan's tensed body did not relax. Pressing up against each other in a corner of this danger zone turned it into another precarious situation concerning their safety in another way. Keeping his cool, Xiao Qie did not shift his eyes away. He could not look away. He only had to show just a fraction of evasiveness, and it would look like he really had a thing for Shinzachuan. "You are pressing me too tightly," Xiao Qie said nonchalantly. Shinzachuan did not reply. For the first time, Xiao Qie knew how to read the words. He who rides a tiger finds it difficult to dismount. He wanted to raise his head and gasp for air, but he did not do so, because doing so would look like he was a rascal who was too impatient to even wait. He swore that he did not have that intention. It was just that they were too close to each other. He was instinctively bewitched by this minute touch and distinctive scent, and his body consequently submitted to the impulses of his bestial desires. Xiao Qie felt Shinzachuan sliding down along his chest. The very instant Shinzachuan separated from him, he breathed out a light sigh of relief, as if he had been relieved of a huge burden. But before he was done heaving his sigh of relief, his collar tightened around him. His person rose, scraping against the moss before he was hurled into the stream without warning. Before Xiao Qie landed in the water, he backhandedly grasped hold of Shinzachuan's wrists. Then he lifted his leg to hook and trip Shinzachuan. Just as Shinzachuan fell into the stream too, Xiao Qie rolled over, lifted Shinzachuan's wrists, and heavily pinned him under his body. "We have already done the amorous stuff." An uncompromising Xiao Qie refused to let Shinzachuan move. "Isn't it too unrighteous to raise your hand at me now?" The 10 fingers on both of Shinzachuan's clasped hands were slightly parted, and his hair scattered in the water. He could only gasp for breath with his chin slightly raised. Pulling at the corners of his lips slightly, he said, "It's not a good choice to force yourself upon others." "I don't have that intention." Xiao Qie itched so much to crush every word into pieces with his teeth. Shinzachuan pressed his knee against him and looked at him with a meaningful gaze. With a hint of forbearance in Xiao Qie's expression, he hung his head down and shook his dripping wet hair. The water droplets spattered over Shinzachuan's face. Without waiting for Shinzachuan to react, he had already reached out his hand to rub the back of Shinzachuan's neck ruthlessly and stubbornly until that bit of mud that was always on his mind was all but rubbed away. Then, he fastened Shinzachuan's collar tightly and securely around him. Rainy nights are wet and cold. Xiao Qie loosened his grip on Shinzachuan and stepped down from his body. "Take care of your body." With that, he dumped his head into the water without giving Shinzachuan a chance to reply. Water droplets slid down and dripped when he raised his head up again, and he had already more or less calmed down. Splashing a handful of water, Xiao Qie grasped his blade up with penetrating eyes and said, "It's almost dawn. Let's go." Ji Lei noticed that the day was about to break, yet they still had yet to find the man. He could not help but increasingly fret. Qiao Tianya peeled away the collar of the dead soldier, but he did not find any traces. This batch of men are Xiao II's men. Xiao Tianya squatted down and pondered it. Every move of his in Kudu cannot escape our eyes. When did he come to raise these kinds of formidable soldiers who have no fear of death? Finding him now is the top priority. Jilei looked toward the northwest of Kudu. The 8 great training divisions should have already taken control of all the main city gates of Kudu. We mustn't lose our heads. Looking at Jilei's hand that had never once left his blade, Xiao Tianya felt that his restlessness was definitely not just because Xiao II and Prince Chu had yet to be found. It seemed as though there was another reason. Xiao II is the life-saving token. Xiao Tianya maintained his composure and watched Jilei. Yet there are other assassins thrown into the mix tonight. Does your excellency have any idea? The number of people the Xiao clan has offended isn't small. Someone wants to fish in troubled waters. Jilei suddenly stared at Xiao Tianya. How would I know who it is? Xiao Tianya spontaneously spread his hands out and said, We can't find Xiao II at present. Your Excellency, he must have come prepared, that's why he has slipped from our fingers the entire night. It's almost dawn now, and he has played us into running around in circles. It seems more like we have fallen into his trap. Fallen into his trap? Jilei furrowed his brows. I'm afraid the reason he put himself in danger is to delay time. Xiao Tianya stood up and looked out into the grassland in the distance. My guess is that he has reinforcements. The troops on all 4 sides have not moved. So where is his reinforcement from? Xiao Tianya did not answer, because he did not know either. Shi Guan rode his horse back to the capital and found it silent all around when he entered the city gate. With his doubts roused, he drew his blade while on horseback and asked his deputy general, Are there any anomalies in Kudu tonight? The deputy general came over to lead the horse. Seeing his nervous expression, he replied, No, it's all as usual. Shi Guan said, Gather the men. Except for those on strict guard duty at the various city gates, all the rest will follow me to encircle and defend the palace. With that, he spurred his horse on towards the palace. His wife and son were still in the palace. As long as the night was not over, the Empress Dowager would definitely not let him see his wife and son. So even if he had to risk his own life, he had to ensure the Empress Dowager's safety. The deputy general went to deploy his men, but as he led the patrol squad, he came across a group of drunken men from the Imperial Army. The 8 great training divisions had always looked down upon the Imperial Army. Without getting off his horse, he brandished the whip and cursed, Scram. The vice-commander of the Imperial Army was a man with a blade scar on his face. After getting lashed, he unexpectedly grinned and rolled at the hooves of the horse. He shouted, We are both a part of the garrison guard system. 3 My rank is a little higher than yours. Why did you hit me? How dare you hit me? The deputy general sneered, Low-life pests of the government coffers. For Scram. Don't hold up the 8 great training divisions from important business. The man swiftly turned and rose to his feet in a single move and smiled malevolently at the deputy general. He said, Important business? The Imperial Army is the important business you will get a taste of tonight. He had only just said that when the Imperial Army, whom had been in various stages of drunkenness, drew their swords in unison. The deputy general reined in his horse in shock. The rows of men behind him already had their throats slit. The deputy general snapped, Is this a rebellion? The 8 great training. The glint from a blade flashed before him, and he instantly fell off the back of his horse. His blood spilled over the ground. The man kicked the deputy general's head aside and wiped his blade clean on the deputy general's chest. He said in a steady voice, Keep daydreaming. The political situation has changed. It's time for my Imperial Army to piss on your heads from the top. Faint white lines appeared on the horizon. Sunrise was fast approaching. Xiao Tianya hurriedly drank some water and tossed the water bag 5 in passing to the man behind him. He wiped his mouth and said, keep searching. But then, after he took a few steps, something clicked in his mind. He suddenly turned his head and carefully sized up the subordinates behind him. Where was Prince Chu hiding? There was no way he could have escaped out of here, so why had they been unable to find him? Because they had been pursuing Prince Chu all night, but it was possible that Prince Chu had already become an imperial bodyguard. Qiao Tianyao instantly gave his order. Inspect the waste tokens. 6. Everyone on the duty record tonight must be verified face to face. Check now. The imperial bodyguards removed their waste tokens and presented them without exception to the judge to authenticate against their faces. The judge 7 checked each token and swept a glance across each man it belonged to. He conducted his check with his photographic memory until the very end of the line. Waste token. The judge raised his eyes and stared at the other party like an eagle. Hand your waste token over. The other party pushed his waste token onto the tray, and the imperial bodyguard leaning closely next to him suddenly began to tremble. The latter hung his head down, not daring to raise it. The judge did not seem to notice. Using his brush, he drew a tick in the book and said, "Which bureau?" Chun Yang replied, "Office of Ceremonial Swords." 8. I haven't seen you during a mission. The judge said, "First time?" Li Jianheng trembled so much that Chun Yang knew they could not escape this. He remained unruffled and said, "Strangers at the first meeting, friends at the second. You will find me familiar enough after seeing me a few more times." The judge pointed at Li Jianheng with the brush and said, "Waste token." Li Jianheng did not manage to pull it off even after a few attempts. The judge smiled and reached a hand out as if to remove the token for him. The moment the judge extended his hand, Chun Yang's body tensed. Who would have expected Li Jianheng to have already lost heart? As the judge moved, Li Jianheng flinched back holding his head and cried out involuntarily, "Don't hurt me!" Oh shit! Right at this critical moment, they suddenly heard a shrill whistle. Following right after, a horse with a white chest and black back unexpectedly galloped out of the forest. As the day broke, the gerfalcon finally led the way back, circling in the air towards them. Hua Xiqian heard the movements and saw a troop of military forces galloping across the grassland towards them in an attack. He asked in a stern tone, "The 8 great training divisions?" But these men had no insignia on their armors. They did not even carry banners. Knowing that the time had come, Chun Yang immediately supported Prince Chu and said in a loud voice, "Under the protection of the Imperial Army, all those who bear swords before His Royal Highness the Crown Prince will be slain. Move back now." Hua Xiqian took 2 steps forward in disbelief. He looked back and shouted, "Prince Chu is being held hostage by traitors. What are you all waiting for?" Li Jianheng had no way to retreat. Seeing the judge pounce on him, he could not help but yell. A long blade that was suddenly tossed out from the forest stabbed into the ground right before Li Jianheng. Shao Qia leaped down, took off his waist token, and threw it into the tray. He said a deep voice, "With the main forces bringing up the rear, who still dares to move?" Ji Lei had just arrived riding his horse. On seeing this, he bellowed too, "What a load of bullshit! Just a mere imperial army." The gerfalcon landed on Shao Qia's shoulder. Shao Qia stroked the gerfalcon as though he was rewarding it. He said, "If old Ji has the balls to, then try." Ji Lei looked towards the grassland again. The vanguards of the imperial army had already arrived. Yet there seemed to be no end to the long stretch of military forces behind. The Qidong Tsangjuan commandery banner suddenly unfurled, and he saw that the one at the head of the galloping horses was precisely Qi Juin. Hua Xiqian retreated several steps, holding on to Pan Rugi, and said in a hoarse voice, "The letter to Qidong has been intercepted." How could they so soundlessly? If all the letters in the kudu have to go through the hands of the imperial bodyguards, Shao Qia kept away his blade. Then how troublesome would that be? Seeing that the situation was beyond salvation, Hua Xiqian sat on the ground and murmured, "The Empress Dowager is still around, the Empress Dowager is advanced in years. In order to take care of her health, she has already handed all matters pertaining to the patrol and defense of Kudu to the Imperial Army to take charge. Xiao Qia had run for the entire night, and now, he pulled up Li Jianheng and said, "Your Highness has been on the move all night. It has been hard on you." Qi Juin's horse had already arrived. She turned to dismount and kneeled to Li Jianheng to pay her obeisances. She said loudly, "Your Highness, do not worry. The 200,000 military forces under Qidong's command are on full alert. This subject, Qi Juin, will go all out to ensure the safety of your Highness." As if he was in a dream, Li Jianheng looked blankly at Qi Juin, then looked to his left and right. Xiao Tianyao was the most discerning and astute. Seeing that the outcome was a foregone conclusion, he immediately kneeled. As soon as he did so, the imperial bodyguards discarded their blades and kneeled down one after another in succession. Li Jianheng clenched his empty palms as though he was clutching on to some life-saving straw. He practically wept with joy. The tears in his eyes trickled down even while he was still muttering, "Now that I'm the crown prince, I'll surely heavily reward everyone's great kindness in the future." Chapter 26, Frost. Chapter 26. Frost. Imperial concubine Wei was on tenterhooks as she walked. Seeing the unfamiliar palace walls around her, she could not help but ask in fear, "Gong Gong, why aren't we there yet? Where is the Empress Dowager?" The eunuch walking ahead ignored her. Imperial concubine Wei's hair stood on end in this quiet and secluded place. She stopped in her tracks, then feigned a stomachache and stirred up a ruckus about wanting to head back. She had never seen this eunuch leading the way before. He looked unfamiliar and young. The eunuch turned his head back to look at her and said in a gentle voice, "We will be there soon. Support Imperial concubine Wei as she walks. We mustn't let Nyang fall." The eunuchs on both sides immediately held on to Imperial concubine Wei to support her. Imperial concubine Wei started to struggle. She raised her voice to yell, but was gagged. The eunuchs nimbly hoisted her up and speedily walked on ahead. There was a well in the deserted courtyard, with some water remaining at the bottom of the well. The eunuch craned his head to look and said, "Right here. Send Nyang in." Imperial concubine Wei struggled with all her might, and her well-maintained fingernails scratched the arm of the leading eunuch. Her bun was disheveled as she shook her head and sobbed while clinging to the edge of the well. The eunuch stroked her pretty hand and told the men in a pitying voice to lift the stone. Then, a plop startled away the birds on the branch over the vermilion wall. Emperor Xianda lay inside the horse carriage, while Li Jianheng kneeled by his side holding a medicine bowl in his hands. Emperor Xianda's breathing was so weak that he could not even cough. He beckoned to Li Jianheng. The latter quickly put aside the medicine bowl and moved over on his knees. He said, "Imperial elder brother, are you feeling better?" Emperor Xianda placed his hand on the back of Li Jianheng's hand and said laboriously, "Jianheng, your younger brother one is here." Li Jianheng started crying again. He said, "Your younger brother is right here." The former emperor, in his later years, was impeded by others. At that time, the crown prince of the Eastern Palace was my eldest brother, while I, Emperor Xianda, looked at him. I was like you, an idle prince. The ways of the world are unpredictable. In the end, this empire fell into my hand. But ever since I ascended to the throne, I have been under control. Every move I make is just like a puppet before a screen. If Imperial Mother wants me to laugh, then I have to laugh. If she wants me to die, then I must now die. Li Jianheng choked with tears. Emperor Xianda said, "In the future, you will become that lonely man." All at once, Li Jianheng burst into tears. He held Emperor Xianda's hand and pleaded, "Imperial elder brother, how could I be him? I'm just a worm in this Li clan's empire. How am I up to sitting at the peak? Imperial elder brother, I'm scared, I'm so scared." "Don't be." With a sudden burst of energy, Emperor Xianda held Li Jianheng's hand tightly and opened his eyes wide. "You are different from me. The Empress Dowager's kin 3 have lost. There's only death left for Hua Xiqian. Likewise for Pan Rugi. If you kill them, then the Empress Dowager will have no one left to aid her. From then on, power will fall back to you, and you will be the ruler of all lands under heaven. What I couldn't do, you can. Emperor Xianda started coughing so violently that he trembled all over. Unwilling to release Li Jianheng, he continued with blood in his mouth. Eliminate the Empress Dowager's kin and supervise the court officials. The Hua clan has lost. And something else you must bear in mind. Allow no one to sleep too soundly in the bed of imperial power. For those who save you today can kill you tomorrow. Military power is like a fierce tiger. Shao, Emperor Xianda vomited fresh blood, throwing Li Jianheng into a panic. Never, Emperor Xianda gasped for breath and gripped Li Jianheng so hard that the latter hurt. Never ever release. Never ever release back to Li Bei. It did not matter if he was a rich young master or an extraordinary talent. As long as he was here, the Shao clan was just a dog. Even though the Empress Dowager's kin have been defeated, it did not mean that the frontier would not assemble their own personal army and consolidate their power to challenge the central administration. Without the Hua clan, who else could hold the Shao clan in check? Since Shao Qie had the disposition to be able to endure it in silence for 5 whole years to transform the imperial army from a degenerate bunch into remarkable soldiers, then imagine if they gave him another 5 more years before letting him return to Li Bei. Would he not become a menace then? Li Jianheng said blankly, Imperial elder brother, how can we do that? Imperial elder brother, strip him of his power 5 and reduce his troops. Emperor Xianda said weakly, when necessary, kill him. Li Jianheng saw him close his eyes and instantly wailed. Even before his death, Emperor Xianda never released his hand. The resentment and gloom in his expression never once dissipated. He ascended to the throne for 9 years, and he had never made a decision even once before the Empress Dowager. It was the Empress Dowager who had the final say over his meals, clothing, expenses, and even the choice of woman to spend the night in his chamber. 6. The craziest move he had ever made in this life was to communicate secretly with Qidong and draw Shi Guan over to his side to pave, at the hunting grounds, what seemed like a smooth way to the throne for Li Jianheng. The long procession on their way back stopped, and tremendous cries of grief and sorrow rang out. Dense mass of ministers kneeled. Hai Liangyi took the lead in shedding tears and choking with sobs. He cried out, Your Majesty, and this was the last of Emperor Xianda's honor. The funeral bell in Kudu tolled for a very long time, and the entire country wept bitter tears. Empress Dowager Hua sat on the couch and fed Emperor Xianda's parrot. Listening to the sound of the bell, the parrot shouted, Jianyun! Jianyun! Jianyun is back! The eastern pearls 7 beside Empress Dowager Hua's ears swayed slightly as she nodded and said, Jianyun is back. The parrot then shouted, Imperial Mother! Imperial Mother! Empress Dowager Hua remained motionless as she tapped her wooden spoon. The white hair in the slanting shadow could no longer be covered up, and the fine wrinkles at the corners of her eyes looked like the cracks on valuable porcelain. The parrot shouted a few more times before it suddenly fell headlong into the cage and went permanently still. Empress Dowager Hua set aside the wooden spoon and sat quietly until the sound of the bell stopped. Only then she said, Where's Imperial Concubine Wei? Why is she taking so long to come? Because of Emperor Xianda, Shao Qie was so busy after returning to the capital that he could hardly get a breather. For several days, he kneeled together with the other officials. By the time he could really get to lie down, he was already exhausted. But even though he was dead beat, he still had to bathe. As Shao Qie wiped his body, he saw that the scrapes and grazes on his shoulders had already scabbed over. He put on a new robe and came out to ask Chen Yang, Where is that man? This time, Chen Yang knew who he meant. He replied, The imperial bodyguards are being reorganized, so he has to re-enlist these few days. He didn't even go home much. I'm asking, Xiaoqie said, where is Ji Lei? Who are you talking about? Chen Yang scratched his head a little abashedly and said, Oh, Ji Lei. He's been detained. He should be executed by beheading after the new emperor ascends to the throne. Viceroy, weren't you the one who locked that man up? Xiaoqie put on his outer garment and said in all seriousness, I forgot. Shen Zichuan, Gu Qingqing and Xiaowu were eating their noodles at the noodle stall. When they were halfway through the meal, Xiaowu suddenly stared fixedly ahead. Shen Zichuan turned his head back and saw Xiaoqie tossing some silver to the proprietor. He then lifted his robe to sit beside him and said, 2 bowls of noodles. Xiaowu slurped his noodles down. Holding the bowl, he shuffled on his butt away to another table like a timid quail. Under Xiaoqie's gaze, Gu Qingqing took his bowl and moved away too. Shen Zichuan picked at his noodles and said, I'm full. Finish it. Xiaoqie pulled out a pair of chopsticks and clamped them at Shen Zichuan. Afraid to see me? Look at how anxious you are to flee. Of course. Shen Zichuan slowly took the last bite. Anyone who gets pinned down once should be afraid. You made your escape pretty fast that other day. We were protecting the emperor. Xiaoqie's noodles came, and he poured vinegar into it. It was such a good opportunity for you to get a promotion. Why did you run? I did nothing of the sort. Shen Zichuan blew at the soup and drank it. So why join in the fun? Xiaoqie started eating his noodles. When he was almost finished, he suddenly piped up, Come to think of it, you squatted behind me that night for a long time, didn't you? Who to choose? Why not play it by ear? If Shi Guan took down Kudu, you will give me a stab. If Shi Guan didn't, you will give me a hand. Keeping an eye on the perfect opportunity was just to wait for me to fall that one time before you would make your move. Then you're lucky. Shen Zichuan inclined his head and smiled. You're still alive. Xiaoqie said, You couldn't be the one who shot that arrow at me, could you? If I weren't in a perilous situation, then how could your favor have appeared all the more significant? I didn't even ask for anything in return for the great favor I did. Shen Zichuan said, Why are you still thinking that I'm plotting against you? It's not asking for anything in return that's the problem. Xiaoqie did not seem to have eaten his fill. He set aside his chopsticks and said, That day you dare not appear before Prince Chu, was it because you were afraid of Ji Lei, or because you were afraid Hua Xiqian would blurt out something? Shen Zichuan stacked his copper coins neatly, then leaned close to Xiaoqie to whisper, Wrong. I was afraid of you. Xiaoqie parroted, Afraid of me? That hardness, man. The human voices around him seemed far away. All that remained in Xiaoqie's ears was this warm puff of hard. Because of this word, he realized that Shen Zichuan was wearing a fastened collar today which half surrounded that neck, denying him of the chance to eye it wantonly again. His expression underwent a few changes, then he looked at Shen Zichuan and squeezed out 2 words through clenched teeth, Don't worry. The second young master has come of age now too. Shen Zichuan sat back upright. Time to get a wife. Your second young master has more tricks to play than you. Seeing that he was about to leave, Xiaoqie grasped his wrist to forbid him from standing up. He said, You are always wanting to leave before I'm done talking. That's against the rules. And you're always laying your hand on me at every turn. Shen Zichuan said, Tell me again about the rules. Xiaoqie released his hand and said, I'll repay you for the friendly sentiment. Call me master and I'll consider it repaid. Shen Zichuan said, But you have to return me the thing. Xiaoqie said, Surely you don't want me to keep chasing after you for the thumb ring, right? Shen Zichuan tossed the bone thumb ring to him without demur. Xiaoqie caught it and said suspiciously, What kind of conspiracy is this? To think you would return it the moment I said it. The way honest people handle matters, Shen Zichuan said, is just that straightforward. At this point there was nothing more to say. Xiao Qia watched Shen Zichuan rise to his feet as he turned the thumb ring around with his fingertip. Somehow, he found it too easy. Going home? He asked behind him. It's my turn to be on duty tomorrow. The Imperial bodyguards have been reshuffled. So what duty are you talking about? Xiao Qia said, Winter is a difficult time. Take care. Small fry like me drift with the current and go with the flow. Shen Zichuan turned around. The one who should take care isn't me. Xiao Qia touched his knuckles and said, And while you are at it, send my regards to Ji Gangshifu. Shen Zichuan's leg that had already taken a step forward paused in mid-action as he swiftly stared towards him. Xiao Qia wore his thumb ring properly and jested, Lanzhao, want to go and play together? Chapter 27, Autumn Chill. Chapter 27, Autumn Chill. Shen Zichuan immediately smiled and said, This is no big secret anyway. Goodbye. Why don't hear me out first? Xiao Qia was in a good mood after recovering his lost thumb ring. Since Ji Gang is your master, then we are fellow disciples. I'm older than you, so it wouldn't put you at a disadvantage to call me Shi Xiao. The Ji clan has nothing to do with Li Bei. Shen Zichuan's mind quickly recalled his fight with Xiao Qia in the snow 5 years ago. Back then, he had felt a sense of familiarity that kept bugging him. Not necessarily so, Xiao Qia said. It's hard to say for sure when it comes to stuff like affinity. Shen Zichuan gestured to Gu Qingqing and Xiaowu and sat back down beside Xiao Qia. He said, You checked Gu Qingqing out. I can't forget it. Xiao Qia looked at him. 5 years ago, he fled so fast. 5 years later, he's close to you. How could I not get suspicious of something so glaring? So I took the opportunity to check him out and managed to dig out all about him. What do you want to do? Shen Zichuan asked with a smile. Nothing. Xiao Qia raised a finger to point and tap at Shen Zichuan's eyes. There's no need for you to force a smile. We could be considered sworn friends in life and death. So there's no point in putting on an act of bravado. Your mind is already troubled. Afraid now, huh? Shen Zichuan said, Not quite there yet. Xiao Qia reversed his chopsticks and tapped the table intermittently. He said, Since Ji Gang is your Shifu, then it makes sense for the Imperial bodyguards led by Gu Qingqing to spare your life back then. You are over-suspicious. Shen Zichuan looked at the brown oil stain accumulated on the tabletop. Just because that kick didn't kill me, your suspicions were roused, and you kept probing into it. You are really dogged. That's all the virtues I have. Xiao Qia said, and I use them all on you. Since we are from the same school of martial arts, Shen Zichuan said, it wouldn't do for you not to report your Shifu's name, right? Bored stiff, Xiao Qia tossed the chopsticks back into the bamboo holder and said, Let's hear you call me Shi Xiang first. Shen Zichuan said nothing. Xiao Qia said, Ji Gang could be considered a real man. I sent someone to Duanzhou to make inquiries. Everyone thought he was burned to death. Was he the one who killed Xiaofuzi? Nope. Shen Zichuan righted the chopstick holder. My Shifu is already advanced in age. How could he have killed him? A slight wind rose right then. Neither man moved. Xiao Qia said, You looked like you have done nothing. Yet I feel as if you have done everything. Whether I did it or not, all of you will not let me go. Propping himself on his stool, Shen Zichuan turned to Xiao Qia and smiled slowly. He said softly, Then why don't I do all the bad things so that you are justified in hating me? The next day. It was only when Xiao Qia entered the palace that he learned Imperial concubine Wei was dead. Li Jianheng had already changed his attire. These days, he had cried until he looked wan and sallow. Seated in a high position, he said, They said she slipped and fell into the well. They didn't find her body until last night. This slip was really too coincidental. Seeing no one around, Li Jianheng asked in a whisper, Suan, don't tell me it's you. Xiao Qia shook his head. Li Jianheng seemed relieved. He fidgeted in his seat and said, Now that I live in the palace, I can see the eunuchs the moment I open my eyes at night. It's rather scary. They used to call Pan Rugi Lao Zuzong one, and now this Lao Zuzong is still locked up in prison. Suen, do you think they will hate me? He let loose a stream of grumbles, and they were all about how afraid he was. In the end, he got Xiao Qie to transfer the imperial army over first to take over the key duty of the palace patrol. Xiao Qie naturally would not refuse. He stayed for a moment and listened as Li Jianheng said, Li Bei has sent a message saying that the Prince of Li Bei and your eldest brother are on the way here. Suen, you'll be able to see them in a few more days. Li Jianheng was somewhat playing up to him. To think he had to be even more timid than he was in the past, right before he was about to become the master of the lands under heaven. That insufferable arrogance of his seemed to have been worn away during the autumn hunt. He had already understood who was in power. Xiao Qie did not intend to accept the reward bestowed upon him. His wish was something Li Jianheng could not be any more clear about. But to date, Li Jianheng had said nothing about letting him back to Li Bei. Xiao Qie's expression remained impassive, but his heart sank. 5 days later, the Prince of Li Bei entered Kudu. That day, the autumn rain continued uninterrupted. Xiao Qie rode his horse out of the city early in the morning and stood in the pavilion where he had seen them off back then. After waiting for 4 hours, he finally saw several flying eagles materializing out of the sky. The Meng on his shoulder instantly grew excited and charged into the rain to hover and catch up with its brothers and sisters. The armored cavalry galloped over in the rain, looking much like a stroke of thick ink in the water sweeping towards Xiao Qie. Without waiting for the armored cavalry to come nearer, he flipped out of the pavilion and dashed up in the rain to greet them. "Father!" Sitting on his horse, Xiao Jiming laughed aloud and said to his father before him, "He looks so tall and strong now. But the moment he sees father, he shows his real self." Xiao Fengshu took off his bamboo hat and leaned over to rap on Xiao Qie's head. He scrutinized him for a moment and said, "You've grown taller." Xiao Qie grinned and said, "That's right, Dage is almost going to be half a head shorter than me." "What a smug lad." Xiao Jiming said, "Ever since he outgrew me, he has to mention it every year we meet." Xiao Fengshu let Zhao Hui lead his horse away as he dismounted, and raised his arms to give his youngest son a sudden hug. Patting him heavily on the back, he said, "Silly lad." The pats made Xiao Qie smile. He said, "I have been waiting for a long time. Did something happen on the way?" Zhao Hui said, "The little young master caught a chill at home. So the prince made a detour to Dengzhou to invite the venerable Tu Igue back home for a look." Xiao Qie said, "Ah Sun is sick? When did it happen? Why didn't Dage mention it in the letter?" Xiao Jiming said, "It's just something minor. There's Iji at home to look after him. Don't worry about it." Xiao Qie felt a little disappointed. 5 years ago when he left Li Bei, his eldest sister-in-law had been pregnant. Now little Ah Sun was 4 years old, and he had not even seen him yet. He could only learn of some interesting tidbits of his little nephew from his father's and brother's letters. He wanted to go home. Xiao Qie's disappointment was fleeting. He smiled and said, "I have already prepared a birthday present. When Dage returns home this time, please bring it back on my behalf." Xiao Fengshu dusted off the brim of his bamboo hat and said, "Before we set off, Sun specially painted a picture for you. I'll get Zhao Hui to bring it to you later. This is not the place to chat. I'll head for the palace first. It's not too late for us father and son to talk when I return to the residence at night." The party of men mounted their horses and rode their way into Kudu. It had already been many years since the Prince of Li Bei had shown himself in public. Now that the name of the 4 generals had spread far and wide, very few people would still remember the Prince of Li Bei, Xiao Fengshu. As autumn came, Grand Mentor Qi ate so well that he put on weight. At present, he was washing his feet in the rain, wiggling and rubbing his toes against each other. He said, "Speaking of the 4 generals of the world, they actually existed 20 years ago. Back then, Xiao Fangxiu of Libei, Qi Xiu of Qidong, Lu Pingyan of Bianjuan Commandery, and Feng Yixing of the Suatian Pass, were the commanders-in-chief of the military forces on all sides. Feng Yixing later died in battle, and the Feng clan's bloodline was severed. No one probably remembers this name today. But back then, they were all valiant warriors who stepped onto the frontier pass with their horses and wiped out the Bianxia troop. Feng Yixing? Ji Gang responded in a loud voice as he did the cooking inside. What do you mean no one remembers? Chuaner. Both of General Feng's sons died on the battlefield. He later adopted a son, who is your Shifu's eldest brother. Shen Zichuan scooped rice into the bowls and repeated, Shifu's eldest brother? Ji Gang smacked his own head and said, I forgot to tell you. Grand Mentor Qi yelled, Is the food ready? Isn't his eldest brother's Qianqiu? What's there to tell? Anyone could guess. Shen Zichuan served the dishes, laid out chopsticks for Grand Mentor Qi, and said respectfully, Teacher, please have your meal. Grand Mentor Qi gulped down a mouthful of wine and said, Having someone wait on you is still the most comfortable feeling ever. Ji Gang wiped away his sweat and sat on the other side of the table and said, You said earlier that Xiao II told you he's from the same school of martial arts with us. Then, I'm afraid his Shifu is Qianqiu. Shen Zichuan took 2 mouthfuls of rice. Ji Gang lamented, I haven't seen him in years. Did you exchange blows with Xiao II this time? How was it? Were the strokes of his blade strong and forceful? Grand Mentor Qi said, Let Lanzhao eat first. We'll talk again when we have eaten our fill. It's dangerous this time, and there's no hurry. We can rest for a few days. I should have thought of it. Ji Gang said, Xiao II wore a bone thumb ring. The one in this world who knows best how to wield a powerful bow is Qianqiu. Perhaps you will be able to meet your eldest brother now that Xiao Fangxiu has entered Kudu. Grand Mentor Qi picked out the dishes. Qianqiu fought to the death at Tianfei Watchtower. Although he warded off the Bianxia cavalry, his wife died. It was because of that battle that he obtained the name of Thunder Sinking the Jade Stage, but it was also because of it that he never recovered from the setback. Rumor has it that he has left home to become a monk, but it's also possible that he has been living incognito to teach Xiao Fangxiu's son after receiving refuge from the latter. Ji Gang said with sorrow, A general's success is built upon the sacrifices of tens of thousands of people. So what if he's renowned for his impressive military exploits? In the end, he'll still turn into a handful of lust. Those who died on the battlefield are loyal to the end, while those who survived aren't having a wonderful time either. Qianqiu lives incognito, Xiao Fangxiu is ill, and Lu Pingyan is old. 20 more years later, where would the current 4 generals be at? It's all but the slapping of waves on sand, with one generation after generation superseding the former. Grand Mentor Qi was slightly tipsy as he watched Shen Zichuan eat his meal. After a long while, he said, It's too much of a loss to suffer through an entire lifetime for nothing. All of us will eventually die. So why not reach for the sky and fulfill your aspirations before you die? Lanzhao, here. Have another bowl. By the time they had eaten and drank to their heart's content, the sky was already dark. Grand Mentor Qi lay across the mat while Shen Zichuan sat under the eaves to wipe his teacher's feet. Ji Gang took out 2 outer garments and draped it over both of them. Then he squatted in the corner to smoke his pipe. Resting his head on a papaya, Grand Mentor Qi said, Lanzhao, tell me the situation at the hunting ground again. Shen Zichuan gave a detailed account of it again. Grand Mentor Qi listened with his eyes closed. When Shen Zichuan was done speaking, he remained silent. The vines in the courtyard soaked in rain, with each drop pitter-pattering on the leaves. After the rain drummed on the leaves for an unspecified amount of time, Grand Mentor Qi said, Xiao II seemed to be in the limelight this battle, but he is trapped in the same situation as his father and elder brother. The new emperor has called him his brother for as long as 5 years, but he has lain low and concealed himself so deeply, so how could the former not be afraid? Today, the new emperor can let it slide on account of him saving his life, but how long can this friendship withstand until it's all worn away into nothing? I thought he could still tolerate it for a little longer given his endurance. There are countless ways he could have let Qi Juin take the limelight, but he just had to do it on his own. Ji Gang knocked off the ash under the dim light and said, "The wolf cub wants to go home too. All he dreams of are the grassland of Libei. How old is he? Having this bit of spirit is what being young is about. A little lack of forbearance upsets great plans." Grand Mentor Qi said. If he had endured it this one time, then wouldn't he have been able to return home as a dandy young master? Right at this time, Xiao Qie was standing outside the palace gates, looking up at the shadowy palace. The overhanging eaves of these vermilion walls seemed to be a trial heaven had given him. Under this frivolous appearance of his, a ferocious beast howled in silence. Shun Zichuan sat upright. It was at this moment that he oddly understood the meaning behind this move of Xiao Qie. He wanted to go home. He wanted to go home, openly and aboveboard, as his own person. Chapter 28. Drunk in the Alley. Chapter 28. Drunk in the alley. The autumn rain in Kudu never stopped falling after the new emperor ascended to the throne. White lanterns hung high beneath old, black tiles. If one were to stand atop the city wall overlooking the place, they would see a bleak chill shrouding every single spot. Because of the autumn hunt incident, all the imperial bodyguards had their waste tokens one revoked. Imperial bodyguards of 5th grade 2 and above, such as Ji Lei and Xiao Tianya, were all imprisoned. Together with Hua Xiqian and Pan Rugi, they were handed over to be tried in a joint trial by the 3 judicial offices. 3 Shuexiozhua was transferred from the Office of Scrutiny for Revenue and promoted to the position of Assistant Minister in the Court of Judicial Review. This position did not seem to have as much authority and power as the Chief Supervising Secretary of the Office of Scrutiny for Revenue, but in truth, it gave him an in to the central administration of 3 judicial offices. In other words, he not only had the authority to examine any case reviews, but also had the power to participate in the deliberations and rebuttals of proposals from the Ministry of Justice and the Chief Surveillance Bureau. Shuexiozhua. Empress Dowager Hua reclined against the Shumi couch 4 and idly tapped the jet-black jade chess piece 5 against the board. I have never heard of this child before the Nanlin hunting grounds incident. Who is he to the Shui clan? Matron Liuxiang gently fanned the incense censer and said, "To reply, Your Majesty, he is the 3rd son of common birth of the Shui clan. This slave has never heard of this person before, and so this slave specifically went to make some inquiries about him. The Shui clan has no lack of successors." Empress Dowager Hua said. "All these years, Yao Wenyu is the one in the limelight. I thought that old fox, Hai Liangyi, would sooner or later recommend Yao Wenyu into the Grand Secretariat after having imparted all his knowledge to him. Who would have expected him to remain silent on it and use the unremarkable Shuexiozhua instead?" Aunt Li Xiang said, "Shuexiozhua first joined forces with the Provincial Administration Commissioner of Jueshi, Jiang Qingshan, to gather evidence on the sly, then joined up with Secretariat Elder Hai to act as a go-between. He had access to the 6 ministries when he held office as the Chief Supervising Secretary of the Office of Scrutiny for Revenue. Now he has been promoted to Assistant Minister of the Court of Judicial Review. He will be hearing the case of our Secretariat Elder. I fear that he has made up his mind to get to the bottom of the matter, and will not let it go at that. I can't go out now." Empress Dowager Hua looked contemplative. If Shuexiozhua wants to investigate, then let him investigate. The Hua clan is already at such a critical juncture. Go and tell eldest brother that he needs to have the determination to act decisively and cut his loss. Only then will we be able to stage a comeback. Matron Liuxiang uttered an acknowledgement and quietly withdrew. Shen Zichuan shook the rainwater off his umbrella and sat in the rundown veranda of the deserted courtyard. Less than an hour later, Shi Hongshuan's mountain-like figure strode through the Moon Gate 6 and walked over to him, while holding up an umbrella. This is the time when spies abound all around. I almost couldn't get away. Shi Hongxian gathered up his clothes and frowned as he asked, "Is there some urgent matter for you to call me here at this time?" "Shi Guan is in prison," Shen Zichuan said. "Your long-time wish is right before you. Yet you aren't pressing home the attack now following the victory. Are you waiting for him to take desperate action instead? His guilt of committing a capital offense is already but certain," Shi Hongxian said. "Making any more moves now would be like drawing legs on a snake, redundant. Nothing in this world is certain." There was no trace of a smile on Shen Zichuan's fair face. He said, "The more critical the situation is, the more you cannot afford to be negligent. As long as he remains alive in this dangerous situation, there's a chance he will survive through it." Shi Hongxian looked at his side profile and said, "The Hua faction case has already been handed over to the 3 judicial offices. With so many pairs of eyes staring, how are you planning to make your move?" "I'm not making any moves." Shen Zichuan turned his eyes. As the Hua clan's lackey, his crimes during his term of office are too numerous to record. As long as 1 or 2 document proofs is handed over to the 3 judicial offices, then his death will be all but certain. Bearing a weapon before the emperor and trapping the crown prince in to hunt him down. These 2 matters aren't enough to put him to death? As the commander-in-chief of the 8 great training divisions, he has the prerogative to bear a blade before the emperor. The hunt of the crown prince has nothing to do with him. He could simply assert that he headed back to the capital to seek and deploy reinforcements on seeing the situation go wrong. The new emperor now fears the imperial army. Although he has taken down the Hua clan, it is at the time where he needs the help and cooperation of the 8 great clans. It takes time for the 3 judicial offices to review the case. The longer this drags on, the harder it will be for Shi Guan to die. Shen Zichuan sneered a little. "As long as Shi Guan doesn't die, you will remain Shi II, never to step into the limelight." After a lengthy silence, Shi Hongxian said, "What are you planning to do?" "Shi Guan has been assigned special duty in the 8 great training divisions since the 4th year of Xianda. 7 in the 4 years so far, the 8 great training divisions have received a total of 9 million taels of military funds and provisions. Only 7 million of the disbursement were accounted for. Where did the remaining 2 million taels go? They all disappeared after they passed through Shi Guan's hands." Shen Zichuan said, "The audits of the account books are originally handled by Shuexiuzhua. In all likelihood, he will still be able to dig out more void expenses once he checks. Pan Rugi and Hua Xiqian can take such a large sum, because if they do, they are just greedy and corrupt. But Shi Guan can't. He cannot afford to be greedy or corrupt. Control of the 8 great training divisions, whose key task is to patrol and defend Kudu, lies in his hands. If he can't explain the whereabouts of all that money, then one could only suspect if he has been embezzling money to bribe the soldiers and to raise his own private army under the name of the 8 great training divisions." A chill suddenly ran down Shi Hongshuan's back. He said, "Raise his own private army. He stands beside the Son of Heaven's 8 couch. What other reason can there be for him to raise his own private army?" Shen Zichuan said. "No way." Shi Hongxian vetoed it. He raised his hand to wipe away his sweat and said, "You think I'm out of my mind? If it's just associating with the Hua clan, then he's the only one who dies. But if it's harboring the intent to rebel, then my whole family will die. It's a crime punishable by extermination of the entire clan." Shen Zichuan laughed aloud and lowered his voice. "A change of sovereign brings a change of ministers. 9. It's a wonderful opportunity for you to distinguish yourself now that a new emperor has ascended to the throne. This is just Shi Guan giving you his life as a congratulatory gift for your promotion. You want me to? Shi Hongxian stared at Shun Zichuan for a while, and suddenly burst out laughing. He said, "You are really vicious. At the very least, the Empress Dowager has saved you twice. You really show no regard for the kindness shown to you." "Kindness, huh?" Shun Zichuan picked up the umbrella. "It's not too late to repay it after killing them. What's more, the power struggle today is all a game of chess between Shao and Hua. What does it have to do with me?" With that, he opened his umbrella, nodded slightly at Shi Hongxian, then stepped into the night rain. Shi Hongxian sat alone in the veranda. After Shun Zichuan disappeared, he touched his own back, finding it all drenched in cold sweat. A few days later, the Court of Judicial Review reprocessed the autumn hunt case. Jiang Xie, the chief minister of the Court of Judicial Review, served as the presiding judge, while Hai Liangyi served as the supervisor and Xue Xiuzhua, the jury. This was a major case examined and prosecuted by the Chief Surveillance Bureau, with the criminal charges of unconstitutional formation of an insurgent faction, embezzlement of taxes to corrupt governance, and endangerment of the state submitted to the Court of Judicial Review. Of these, unconstitutional formation of an insurgent faction made the 6 ministries jittery. Those who have been to the Hua residence, or have received recommendations from Hua Xiqian and Pan Rugi in the past all found themselves in a precarious position. Countless officials submitted memorials to impeach and report Hua Xiqian and Pan Rugi these few days, with each one making an impassioned statement of loyalty for fear of getting implicated. Seeing those memorials gave Li Jianheng a headache. He was not a person who could sit still to begin with. Even so, he did not dare to fool around during a time where the entire nation was in national mourning. He had seen the way Hai Liangyi confronted Hua Xiqian that night. Thus, he was very much afraid of Hai Liangyi. Hai Liangyi was rigid and inflexible. His appropriately trimmed beard was always hanging before the second clasp on the front of his robe, while his crown was properly worn, and his hair meticulously combed. He never left his clothes open during the 3 hottest periods of summer, 11, and he never folded his arms during the severe winter months. He was like the pine tree on the mountain ridge when he stood, and the swift wind in the quiet valley when he walked. When it came to handling matters, he was never sloppy. He could even listen attentively to the details of the case for 3 days and 3 nights without showing any traces of weariness. Li Jianheng was used to fooling around, so he always went weak in the knees on seeing this kind of elder, scholar-teacher, like 12 minister. Because of the Hua faction case, Hai Liangyi was constantly looking for him to report the details. Li Jianheng found the Dragon Throne 13 in Mingli Hall so hard that his butt was always hurting from sitting too long, so he got his men to pad it up with several layers of cotton-padded mattress. But Hai Liangyi saw it and remonstrated with him, advising him to be steadfast in his conduct. The thrill of having power and authority in his grasp seemed fleeting. What followed right after was an avalanche of heavy responsibilities. The never-ending morning court sessions 14 made it difficult for Li Jianheng to persevere. He sat on the dragon throne, sometimes not even understanding what those people at the foot of his throne were arguing about. No money? Then, collect taxes. Kill a bunch of corrupt officials, and the money could be recovered, no? What's there to argue about? Li Jianheng did not dare to reveal his innermost thoughts. He was afraid of Hai Liangyi, and even more afraid of these civil servants and military commanders. He did not know what they were fighting about, or why the Hua faction could not be executed immediately by decapitation, let alone what the Empress Dowager's intention in sending him snacks every day was. He huddled up on the dragon throne, as if he were merely having a dream. Is His Majesty ill? Having been summoned, Shao Qie entered the palace and met the imperial physician from the Imperial Academy of Medicine outside Mingli Hall. The imperial physician said, "He worried too much, and the autumn chill has gotten to him. When the viceroy enters later, please persuade His Majesty." Xiao Qie took off Longli blade and strode into Mingli Hall. Li Jianheng had just taken his medicine and was zoning out on the couch at the moment. On hearing that Xiao Qie had come, he hurriedly wore his shoes like slippers and called Xiao Qie in. "Suan," Li Jianheng said. "You're just in time. The Imperial Bakery 15 will send the silk-nested tiger's eye candy later. Come and try it too. We had it at the official banquet a few years ago." Xiao Qie kowtowed and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for the bestowment." With his clothes draped around him, Li Jianheng went silent for a moment, then said, "Suan, take a seat." Xiao Qie sat down, and those serving at the sides withdrew. Li Jianheng suddenly stood up and restlessly turned around in circles where he was. He said, "Suan, why aren't they beheading Hua Xiqian? What retrial is the Court of Judicial Review talking about? What else is there for them to go over?" "Arg," Xiao Qie said, "the Court of Judicial Review has to triple-check the case. This is the rule to prevent miscarriages of justice. The evidence against Hua Xiqian is conclusive. He will definitely be executed by decapitation before the new year." "A long night is fraught with dreams," 16 Li Jianheng said nervously. "The Empress Dowager doesn't look like she's in a panic. You know, she keeps sending people to deliver snacks to me every day. What is she thinking of doing? Does she want to poison me to death too?" The Hua clan now is the target of public criticism. So the Empress Dowager somehow has to put on a show of affection. Seeing Li Jianheng's flustered expression with dark circles under his eyes, Xiao Qie said, "Is Your Majesty not sleeping well at night?" "How can I sleep?" Li Jianheng said. "They aren't dead yet. So how would I be able to sleep?" "Suan, go tell Hai Liangyi on my behalf to skip the retrial and carry out the execution on the spot." "How would that do?" Xiao Qie was the viceroy of the imperial army. He had nothing to do with the 3 judicial offices, so how could he interfere in the joint trial by the 3 judicial offices? Moreover, after what happened at the autumn hunt, the next person they would take down would be his own self, Xiao Qie. The civil officials, with Hai Liangyi at the head, were unwilling to let Xiao Qie go. Xiao Fengshu himself had gotten wind of it these few days as well. No one was willing to take a gamble when it came to this matter. It was only with Xiao Qie in Kudu that Li Bei would prove to be diligent in all they did. The crisis in the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua was a sore point. Xiao Jiming could save Kudu once or twice, but could he save Kudu countless times without reservation? Even if he could, who would believe it? Xiao Qie would definitely not get entangled in any disputes with the civil servants at this point in time. Li Jianheng himself knew that it would not work, so he became more and more dispirited. When the silk-nested tiger's eye candy was sent over, he took a few cursory bites of it, but could taste nothing. As soon as Xiao Qie left, he lay on the couch, feeling that this emperor was really boring to be. Shuanglu, who had always been following him to serve him, kneeled beside the couch and whispered, "Your Majesty, 17, how about this slave accompanies you out for a stroll?" Li Jianheng replied, "Not going. I'm tired." Shuanglu hit upon an idea and continued, "Then how about inviting Lady Mu Ru to play the pipa 18 for you?" Li Jianheng turned over and took another glance outside. Seeing no one, he said, "I don't think I can. The nation is in mourning. Besides, she's still at Pan Rugi's residence. If I bring her to the palace now, wouldn't I get a scolding?" Shuanglu let out an "oh my" and smiled, then said, "Your Majesty, you are the emperor. You have the final say within this palace. How would those officials on the outside know what eunuchs in the inner palace does? We'll do it on the sly." Li Jianheng instantly felt his spirits soar. "Not even eating the candy anymore," he said. "Secretariat Elder Hai won't know?" "No one will know." Shuanglu shuffled forward on his knees. "You are our master." "He isn't. Us slaves run errands for Your Majesty. If Your Majesty doesn't want to let anyone know, then no one will know." "Great!" Li Jianheng clapped his hands. "Great, I finally found an opportunity. Go quickly, the sooner the better. Bring Muru in. Panrugi is going to die. Remaining in that compound will only be inviting bad luck. It rained again when Xiaoqia left the palace. He felt vexed for no reason. The zeal and drive he had before the autumn hunt seemed to have dissipated overnight. He did not even want to draw his blade at this moment. Chen Yang and Zhao Hui came to pick him up, and Xiaoqia got into the horse carriage. Halfway through their journey back, Xiaoqia suddenly lifted the curtain and said, "Tell father and Dage that I won't be going back tonight." Without waiting for both men to respond, he jumped off the carriage and headed towards Donglong Street without taking anything with him. "He's gone drinking again." Zhao Hui got off the carriage as well and said to Qin Yang, "You head back and inform the prince and the hereditary prince. I'll follow the young master. It wouldn't look good for him to get drunk and make a scene during a time when the nation is in mourning." Qin Yang said, "In just the time it takes for you to say all these, you would have already lost sight of him. Since the viceroy doesn't want anyone to follow, then let him be." Zhao Hui was Xiao Jiming's deputy general, while Qin Yang was Xiaoqia's deputy general. Although both of them were members of the Xiao clan, the subject of their consideration were ultimately different. Zhao Hui was more like the older brother. He turned his head in the rain. Sure enough, he could no longer see Xiaoqia's figure. With the waste tokens of the imperial bodyguards revoked, its subordinates were all temporarily assigned to the imperial army to serve as patrols. Shen Zichuan just finished his rounds tonight. As he returned home, he passed by the back alley of Shangyun Villa 19 on Donglong Street. Because it was just a drizzle, he did not hold up an umbrella. As he was walking along the road, he suddenly heard a bout of puking sounds before him. Then, a courtesan wearing wooden clogs and no socks trotted out in pursuit of the person who had been puking. The latter gently fended her off. Xiaoqia propped himself up against the wall and pointed at the back door to motion to the woman to stay away from him. The courtesans of Shangyun Villa were all well acquainted with him. They knew that he would not let others touch him while he was drunk, so this courtesan folded a handkerchief and lay it at the side and said in a gentle voice, "Second young master, please go in again once you feel better. I've prepared hot soup for you." Xiaoqia did not respond. The sound of wooden clogs receded into the distance, and he squatted down. His stomach was churning so badly it was hard to bear. This was the way a man should live: eat, drink and make merry as if in a drunken stupor. He had only this one way out. He felt a sudden weight on his back. Xiaoqia suddenly looked back with a stare so cold it would make one flustered. On seeing the man, he thought for a moment before saying, "Why did you kick me?" Shen Zichuan said without blinking, "I didn't." Xiaoqia backhandedly touched his own back for a moment. He pulled at his clothes and said stubbornly, "This is evidence of your guilt." Shen Zichuan scrutinized him for a moment and said, "Have you drunk yourself foolish, Xiao II?" Xiaoqia said, "Do I look like a fool?" Without waiting for Shen Zichuan to reply, he answered himself, "I'm not a fool." Smelling him reeking of wine, Shen Zichuan said, "Don't block my way. I want to go home." Xiaoqia turned his head back and stared blankly for a moment before saying to the wall, "Don't block my way. I want to go home too." Shen Zichuan was about to laugh when he heard him continue, "If I can't go home, then you can forget about going home as well." Chapter 29, Fate. Chapter 29, Fate. Shen Zichuan said, "Oh." Not getting the answer he wanted, Xiaoqia looked back at him and asked, "Why aren't you rebutting?" Shen Zichuan raised his hands to open up the umbrella and said, "I don't have a father or a brother back at home. No acquaintances either. So what's the point of going back?" Xiaoqia picked up the handkerchief to wipe away the water on the back of his neck. He stood up and said, "Oh right. The Prince of Jianxing's residence in Dunzhou has already been cleared out. With your identity, you will only be cursed by all if you go back. That's why when it comes to fate," Shen Zichuan looked at Xiaoqia quietly for a pause before continuing, You will only suffer if you don't get reincarnated into a good life. Xiao Qie did not look at him as he lifted his arm to rub away the raindrops on his forehead. He said, "Then why are you still alive?" Shen Zichuan smiled and said, "Millions of people want me to die. But how could I feel at ease myself if I were to fulfill the wish of others?" Xiao Qie said, "The way for you to survive is to remain in Zhao Zui Temple." Shen Zichuan took 2 steps to bypass the water puddle on the ground and said, "If I remain in Zhao Zui Temple, then you will think that getting executed by decapitation is how I should end up. Xiao Qie, even if you try your best to hide it, you are already used to looking down from above. You are no different from the people who look down on you today. And all those eyes on you now agonize you." He laughed out loud and patted Xiao Qie on the back with a palm. "I seek to live. You seek to die. The Xiao clan once had me trapped, and now the Li clan does the same to you. Isn't the ways of this world strange? The bird in the cage longs for its former woods, while the fish in the pond misses the deep. Your lot in life has been laid bare from start to end. If you can't go back, then you are nothing but a loser with lofty aspirations sans actions. The most regrettable thing in this world is to train a wolf into a dog. How long can your fangs remain sharp in kudu? You followed me during the autumn hunt." Xiao Qie turned his head to the side to look at him, "and saved my life just for this moment of gratification? I am but an insignificant nobody." Shen Zichuan said softly, "Even if I didn't show up, you will still live." "Exactly what?" Xiao Qie's inebriation had worn off. He asked, "Are you up to?" "Repaying a debt of gratitude." The brim of Shen Zichuan's umbrella sheltered Xiao Qie. This was how close he was to the latter. "Repaying all of you for your mercy in not killing me." Xiao Qie suddenly grabbed Shen Zichuan by the collar and said, "I thought you had repent and turned over a new leaf to become a better person. What wrong did I do?" The glint in Shen Zichuan's eyes was even colder than this autumn rain. He pressed in a step closer, almost sticking to Xiao Qie, and asked, "What is my crime? Didn't you take a look at various cities of Duanzhou when you climbed your way out of Chaucer sinkhole?" Xiao Qie tightened his grip. Everyone in the 8 cities was massacred. When the hooves of horses trod through the city gates, all the blood that splashed up was the people's blood. Shen Wei's troops were defeated. Shen Zichuan finally tore off that mask of his, exposing his burning hatred. 40,000 people from Zhongbua were buried in Chaucer's sinkhole. I lost my elder brother and Shenyang to death that day. Where does my fault lie in this? Shen Wei deserves to be killed. Xiao Qie reached the end of his limit too. He suddenly pressed Shen Zichuan up against the wall and said, "Shen Wei should be put to death. You are a Shen too. So how are you blameless?" The oil paper umbrella tumbled to the ground as Xiao Qie slammed Shen Zichuan into the wall and lifted him until his toes could barely touch the floor. Shen Zichuan lifted his leg to stomp on Xiao Qie's chest. Xiao Qie retreated a few steps back in pain, but he did not release his grip as he pulled Shen Zichuan by the collar and flung him to the ground. The pattering rain suddenly intensified and came pouring down in torrent. A burst of crashes rang out from the dark lane, as overturned odds and ends were trampled underfoot. The courtesans of Shangyun Villa, who had been waiting for Xiao Qie, were startled by the commotion. All of them held on to the doors with their wooden clogs in hands to look. Why did they start fighting? Shangyun hurriedly draped on her outer garment and slipped on her wooden clogs to rush over. "My dear masters, talk it over if you have something to say. This isn't worth coming to blows over." Shen Zichuan rode Xiao Qie and punched the latter's head aside. Xiao Qie grabbed Shen Zichuan's wrist and tugged him hard towards himself. Licking the blood between his teeth with the tip of his tongue, he said, "Neither you nor I shall dream of having an easy time." Shang Yun had already called out the hired help, and they joined forces to drag both men apart. Xiao Qie jerked his arm, and those tall and strapping hirelings felt the webs between their thumbs and forefingers going numb. However, Xiao Qie did not pounce again. He raised his fingers to wipe at the wound on his face and said, "Piss off." Seeing that the situation did not look good, Shang Yun motioned for the hirelings to hurry over to the prince's residence to call for help. Who would have expected Xiao Qie to say, "I'll break the legs of whoever dares to alert my father"? Shang Yun's voice softened and she took the opportunity to say, "What is this about? Second young master has always shown tenderness towards the fairer sex. Why did you frighten the ladies tonight? It is common for gentlemen to swap pointers with one another after a bout of drinking. Let's forget it and bury the hatchet with a smile, all right?" Xiao Qie rose to his feet, stripped off his dirty robe, and threw it to Shang Yun. He said, "Go in." Holding his outer robe, Shang Yun attempted to persuade him. "Second young master, it's so cold outside." Her voice trailed off as she lost the courage to let out even a squeak. She waved her hand quietly at the courtesans and led them back inside. However, the door was not closed tight this time. All the courtesans clung to the sides of the door and windows to steal a peek. Shen Zichuan picked up the umbrella. He was so filthy all over he was barely recognizable. He had been drenched by the rain, and strands of hair stuck to his cheeks. The contrast of black on white made his fair skin look even whiter. "Next time," Shen Zichuan said, "go right to my door if you want to look for me. I won't necessarily make a trip through this alley even in 800 years. If I knew you would be passing by," Xiao Qie said, "I would not come here even if I have to puke all over inside." Shen Zichuan smiled mockingly and said, "Then it must really be a small world for enemies to meet on such a narrow path." Xiao Qie walked up to him. "I'll watch you closely from now on. You can hardly look after yourself, and you still want to concern yourself over me?" Shen Zichuan raised his umbrella and pulled apart the distance between them. "Old institutions die hard. Just one autumn hunt and you want to bring the Hua clan down to their knees. You are really delusional. You'd better find a way to preserve your life." Xiao Qie pressed his chest against the umbrella and looked askance at him. "How long can you live without the backing of the Empress Dowager? There is already a new master sitting in the imperial court." Shen Zichuan said, "Isn't it time for you to change all those assumptions you have been taking for granted too? You can't kill any of them." Xiao Qie said, "The ones who owe you are the Biancha cavalry and Shen Wei." "Whatever you say." Shen Zichuan draped on that layer of tame outer coat again. He closed his umbrella and said gently to Xiao Qie, "I'll listen to you, okay?" That indescribable rage within Xiao Qie suddenly bubbled up. He said, "Sure. Then you'll stay with me tonight. You sleep under the bed canopy of a sweet, tender lady." Shen Zichuan said, "And you still have the fetish to share your bed with another man?" "I'm sorry, but I don't." No matter how Xiao Qie looked at him now, he looked as though he was up to no good, so he said, "What are you shying away from? Didn't you say whatever I say? Are you," Shen Zichuan pointed to his head, "out of your mind? All the idlers of the imperial bodyguards have been assigned to the imperial army." Xiao Qie said, "So who is the one out of his mind?" Shen Zichuan paused for a moment and said, "What does the viceroy want me to do?" There was still a red imprint remaining on Xiao Qie's cheek. The hostility between his eyebrows dissipated, and he took on the appearance of a lazy slacker. He turned around to sit on the veranda under the eaves and pointed to his own boot. Shen Zichuan unhurriedly moved the corners of his lips at him and said, "Sure." Early in the morning the next day, Chen Yang came to pick him up, and was stunned when he saw Shen Zichuan hugging Longley Blade at the entrance of Shang Yun Villa. Shen Zichuan, who had been leaning against the door, straightened up his body and bowed a greeting to Chen Yang. Chen Yang had an ill sense of foreboding for an instant and asked, "Shen, why is the Red Cavalry 3 here? Ji Lei is still in prison and has not yet been sentenced." Shen Zichuan said, "The imperial bodyguards are temporarily serving as imperial army under the viceroy's supervision." Chen Yang looked at his calm face and felt a chill down his spine. He gave a slight nod of his head and hurried up the stairs. Shen Zichuan watched him go upstairs. At the same time, Shang Yun was coming down the stairs while lifting the hem of her skirt. She said tenderly, "You haven't eaten yet, right? You haven't changed out of those dirty clothes of yours either." Ling Ting, the courtesan upstairs, leaned against the railing with a tired expression and said, "Why is Madame Four still calling out for Ling Ting? You are always forgetting that little lass has been redeemed." 5. It dawned on Shang Yun then, and she said, "I have gotten used to calling her. Go and bring some food over for this Red Cavalry Excellency." When Chen Yang entered, he saw Xiao Qie still sprawled on the couch sleeping. There was no one around attending to him, so Chen Yang went forward and called out to him softly, "Viceroy, Viceroy?" Xiao Qie wearily buried his face and slept for a little longer. He suddenly sat up and asked, "Why is it you? Where is Shen Lanzhao?" "He's keeping watch downstairs." "Viceroy, what happened to your face?" Chen Yang asked in astonishment. "Got punched while I was hunting." Xiao Qie got off the couch and moved his shoulders and arms. He asked, "Did Dage ask you to come for me?" "It was his lordship the prince." Chen Yang said, "We received information early in the morning. The Shakyu 6 Mutual Trade Market was looted by the Biantia cavalry last night. We still need to enter the palace later to discuss this matter in detail. Secretariat Elder Hai has summoned the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Revenue for a convention. Us Libe have to deploy our troops again." Xiao Qie wiped his face with water and immediately stepped out of the door. When he headed downstairs, he saw Shen Zichuan with a courtesan. He strode a few steps down, grabbed the small plate from behind, and tossed a pastry into his mouth. Shen Zichuan looked at him and said, "Eat slowly. No one can save you in time if you choke to death." Xiao Qie swallowed it clean. He smiled at him and put his arm on his shoulder. Leading him outside, he said, "Lanzhao." Shen Zichuan looked at him. Xiao Qie said frivolously, "Why do you still hold an overnight grudge? I've already forgotten all about it after a sleep. Let's go. Second young master will take you along to look for fun." Shen Zichuan swatted his hand away with the sheath of his blade and said, "Second young master, don't take advantage of the chance to touch the back of my neck." Many people gathered in Mingli Hall. Li Jianheng remained seated on the dragon throne, not daring to move. He first tried to figure out Hai Liangyi's expression with his eyes, then shifted them over to the others while trying his best to look dignified and imposing. Now that the brush-holding director of the Directorate of Ceremonials position is vacant, this old subject will present all the various ministries' accounts to His Majesty once they are sent to the Grand Secretariat before signing off on them. Hai Liangyi first said to Li Jianheng, "What does Your Majesty think of the accounts last night?" Li Jianheng had been listening to the Pipa 7 with a beautiful woman in his arms last night. So when Hai Liangyi kowtowed to him, he immediately shifted his buttocks with a guilty conscience and said, "Okay, okay." Xue Xiuzhua, who had been kneeling behind Hai Liangyi, initially had on a neutral expression. But he furrowed his brows on hearing these words. Hai Liangyi waited for a while. But when he saw that Li Jianheng had no intention of saying further, he said, "Autumn is cold and frosty at present. If Li Bei is to deploy troops, then they must report to Kudu the military salaries and provisions to be paid in advance. Your lordship, how much do you need this time?" Xiao Fengshu smiled and said, "I have been ill and out of commission for a long time. All the military affairs have long been entrusted to Jiming. Jiming, tell Secretariat Elder Hai how much money we lack." Xiao Jiming kowtowed and said, "The 12 tribes of Biantia looted the market at this time because winter snow is about to fall. The grain supply of the various Biantia tribes have run out, so they could only loot the mutual trade market. If this were in the past, the military fields of Libe can provide for itself and would not need assistance with army supplies. But the former emperor passed away this year, so it's likely that the 12 Biantia tribes is thinking of taking the advantage of our vulnerability now. If we are to mobilize troops, then we must not only expel them out of our territory but also station our troops there to guard it. I have already submitted the required sum to the Ministry of Revenue. The newly appointed Minister of Revenue took out the memorial. Shuanglu presented it to Li Jianheng. Li Jianheng looked at it for a moment and said, 2 million taels. What's so hard about it? As long as the soldiers don't go cold and hungry. The Minister of Revenue, Qianjin, was a little embarrassed and said, Your Majesty does not know it, but we still have yet to make up for last year's deficiency. The state treasury does not have that much money at such a short notice. Li Jianheng said, Then 1 million taels should be fine, right? Qianjin kowtowed and said, During the autumn hunt, the mobilization of the 8 great training divisions cost us 230,000 taels, and the former emperor spent 540,000 taels. The remaining money in the state treasury still has to be used to pay out salary arrears to all the senior and junior officials. It's soon to be the end of the year, and the civil officials all need to celebrate the new year. We definitely do not have 1 million taels. Your Majesty, we can only allocate 600,000 taels to Li Bei's armored cavalry. Li Jianheng truly never expected there to be a day he would be poor as an emperor. He had wanted to do Li Bei a favor, and doing so could placate Xiaoqie too. Who would have thought that he would have no money? This suddenly put him in such an awkward spot that he wanted so much to dig his way under the table. Instead, he merely uttered a few vague sounds of acknowledgments. Mingli Hall went silent for a moment. Xue Xiuzhua suddenly piped up, Your Majesty, this humble subject has a way. As though he had seen his savior, Li Jianheng said, Please speak. Tell me. Xue Xiuzhua said, When the Hua faction was in power, they put a price on some sinecures and welcomed everyone who could pay up. The ice respect 9 they collected every year were all large sums. Then, there's Pan Rugi who took advantage of the loopholes in procurement to amass wealth blatantly. Both men are now in prison. Why not search both the Hua's and Pan's residences and confiscate their possessions to subsidize the military funds? The second young master of the Shi clan, Shi Hongxian, has already made amends and submitted a document to the Court of Judicial Review yesterday to report Shi Guan of raising his own personal army in private. He even leased out the Shi clan's residence in Kudu to repay the empty accounts of the 8 great training divisions while Shi Guan was in office. The moment Li Jianheng heard they were going to raid the residences, he instantly showed interest. Eager to give it a try, he said, Sure. I have been thinking of this too. Hai Liangyi hesitated for a moment, then said, That's not appropriate. The Court of Judicial Review's retrial is not concluded yet. How can we bypass the law and carry out the sentence straight? Xue Xiuzhua said, It's an emergency. We do not have a choice. Kudu can wait for the retrial, but the Bianxia cavalry will not. We cannot let Li Bei's armored cavalry fight a war on empty stomach. Hai Liangyi was still hesitating, but Li Jianheng had already slapped the table to give his approval. When they came out, Xiao Jiming said to Qi Juin, who had been silent the whole time earlier, How is the Bianjuan commandery holding up? Qi Juin raised her head to look up at the rain beyond the eaves and said, Lu Guangbai is still at Bianjuan, so the 12 tribes of Bianxia will naturally not make a move. But Li Bei is lacking a chief commander. That makes it inevitably tricky for you. Xiao Jiming stood for a moment and sighed. It's hard to come by men with military talents. They aren't easy to find. Qi Juin said, No matter how the situation changes in Kudu, it's the duty of the commanders and generals to protect his home and defend his country. Jiming, military talents are hard to come by, and it isn't easy to nurture and train them. Li Bei is a heavily fortified land at Dezhou's frontier. It will only prove to be detrimental to Li Bei if you still don't choose a successor. It was the original aspiration of each and every one of them to be a valiant general of one side and to become an impregnable fortress of Dezhou. However, a man would eventually age. Entrusting and tethering the lives of an entire army to one person could be overlooked if it was just for a few years, but let it continue for more than a decade, or even a few decades, and the Li Bei's armored cavalry would turn into one that could not do without Xiao Jiming. If one day the Li Bei's armored cavalry were to lose Xiao Jiming, then what would become of the army that had reigned supreme on the battlefield for decades without any blemish to its reputation? I know you have high hopes for Yi. Qi Juin descended the stairs and turned her head back unhurriedly. But he is destined to never fly out of Kudu. You put your eyes on him. Do you think he never noticed it all these years, even though you never spoke of it? The more expectation you have for him, the more agony he'll be in. Li Bei is not his wings, but his cage. Jiming, you and I have been buddies for many years. Let me give you a word of advice. Choose someone else. The palace eaves in the far distance were all shrouded in fog. A lone crow cawed a few times, and silence descended once more. Chapter 30, King of Wolves. Chapter 30. King of Wolves Xiao Qie seems to have forgotten having lost his cool last night. He spurred his horse on through the street, causing cries of discontent to rise all around from the stall vendors on both sides of the street. He hurried over to the palace gate just in time to see the horse carriage from the Xiao clan's prince residence. Zhao Hui lifted the curtain for Xiao Fangxiu and said, "Second young master is here." With his hand on his knee, Xiao Fangxiu looked out of the carriage. His gaze passed past his youngest son and landed upon the man inept in riding behind him, Shen Zichuan. He paused for a moment, but said nothing. When Xiao Qie arrived before him, he saw the injury on Xiao Qie's face and asked, "What did you do last night?" "I went drinking." Xiao Qie reined in his horse and laughed as he held his horsewhip. "I forgot the time. By the time I woke up, it was already late." "Father, are you done with the discussion?" Xiao Fangxiu nodded and asked, "Is that Xin Wei's son?" The autumn wind suddenly came assaulting Shen Zichuan in the face. It grazed past his temples. He met Xiao Fangxiu's eyes and felt a shudder for no reason. His grip on the reins tightened in uneasiness. But Xiao Fangxiu did nothing. The sideburns of Li Bei's old king of the wolves were white. Even though he was sitting all hunched over in the horse carriage, one could still make out his extraordinary height and build. That commanding presence was not something anyone could develop overnight. It was a majestic dignity honed out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. It was a formidable strength so tempered with bones and blood that even his sickness could not overshadow it. Xiao Qie's naturally endowed, sturdy physique was completely inherited from his father. His shocking arm strength, exceptional height, wide shoulders and back, and explosively swift long legs, were all gifts from his father. Compared with the gentler and more elegant Xiao Jiming, Xiao Qie was the true wolf pup. If one were to glance over while the two brothers stood together, there would be no doubt that Xiao Qie was the one who gave off a more aggressive vibe. And now, the real king of wolves was watching Shen Zichuan attentively. Despite already learning how to restrain himself, Shen Zichuan still had the strong urge to flee. This was utterly different from being pinned down by Xiao Qie. This was a gaze that would make one shiver subconsciously. At this very moment, Shen Zichuan recalled Grand Mentor Qi's words. It's Xiao Jiming's time to shine now that Xiao Fangxiu is off commission from illness. Everyone fears Xiao Jiming. But, Lanzhao, 20 years ago, the one who truly secured the frontier with his steed was Xiao Fangxiu. From today's point of view, Qi Xiu clearly has more authority of office as the commander-in-chief of the 5 commanderies, but he has not been conferred the title of a prince. One that is because Qidong is a bestowed fief belonging to the emperor. The 5 commanderies are all founding lands of Dazhou that belong to the Son of Heaven. But it's different for Li Bei. The vast territory of Li Bei stretches from Luoxia Pass to the end of Hongyan mountain ranges in the northeast, and these are all hard-won lands. Xiao Fangxiu led the armored cavalry of Li Bei to conquer inch by inch during the years of Yongyi. Xiao Jiming is now the commander-in-chief of Li Bei's armored cavalry. River of ice-armored cavalry, how awe-inspiring! But it was Xiao Fangxiu who established this powerful regiment of cavalry. The Libei's armored cavalry doesn't have a long history like the Bianjuan commandery garrison troop. They are heavy cavalry that Xiao Fangxiu specially set up to deal a heavy blow to our external foes during the years of Yongyi, when the Bianxia cavalry repeatedly invaded Luoxia Pass. Libei's battle steeds, Libei's soldiers, and Libei's steel blades with hanging chains. Every symbol of the Libei's armored cavalry you can see today all came from Xiao Fangxiu. The 8 great clans have forcibly entrenched themselves in Kudu for a long time. They are the sores and ulcers of Dazhou. The Xiao clan can stand up to the Hua clan as equals because Xiao Fangxiu's status is secure in Libei. As long as Xiao Fangxiu is alive, the Xiao clan will be the towering tree firmly rooted in Libei. The title of the King of Wolves is, by no means, undeserved. Xiao Qia looked back and said, "He's Shen Wei's son." Shen Zichuan dismounted and paid his obeisances to Xiao Fangxiu. Xiao Fangxiu looked at him for a moment and said, "Shen Wei is already dead, and his child is innocent. Since the former emperor has let you out, that means he has absolved you of guilt. But why are you following this lad?" Shen Zichuan kneeled on one knee and hung his head down to say, "This humble servant was assigned to the imperial bodyguards. Now that it's now temporarily under the imperial army, I'm at the viceroy's disposal." "So I see." Xiao Fangxiu looked towards Xiao Qia. "And why are you making things difficult for him?" Xiao Qia licked the wound in his mouth and said, "How would I make things difficult for him? He and I are now sworn friends. Isn't that right, Lanzhao?" Without looking at Shen Zichuan again, Xiao Fangxiu started to chat with Xiao Qia. Shen Zichuan propped himself up with a knee and looked at Xiao Qia's unrestrained smile, and the way Xiao Fangxiu gazed at his son through the puddle of water on the ground. Splashes of raindrops messed up the scene in the puddle. Shen Zichuan retracted his gaze. By the time Xiao Jiming emerged, Xiao Fangxiu had already left. Qi Juin walked a few steps with him and suddenly asked, "Who is that?" Xiao Jiming looked beside Zhao Hui and replied without a change in expression, "That's Shen Zichuan." Qi Juin halted in her tracks and said with some surprise, "Shen Wei's son? Why is he following Yi?" Xiao Jiming said, "Yi is playful. Most likely, he's making things hard for him." Qi Juin looked for a long time before saying, "That appearance of his is too outstanding. I heard that his mother was a dancer from Duanzhou. Fortunately, she was a dancer from Duanzhou and not the Zhangjuan commandery." Commander-in-Chief Qi Shiyu was the most fond of beauties. He was a man who would not move his feet whenever he saw a pretty woman. Although Qi Juin had very few brothers, she had countless Inyang Tu back at home. Speaking of which, Qi Juin turned sideways. Yi is already 23 years of age, right? Isn't he going to marry a wife? Yi is also getting anxious on his behalf. Xiao Jiming said. Libei doesn't need him to marry a noble lady from a powerful and honorable clan. Just a girl from an ordinary family with a clean background will do. Yi keeps sending portraits of all the Libei women she picked out on his behalf to Kudu every year, but not one of them has ever caught his fancy. Qi Juin laughed. A noble lady tends to be haughty, she can't play with him. While a common girl is too timid, she will get frightened the moment she's near him. Besides, how many maidens can handle that temper of his? Finding someone who he is mutually in love with and vice versa is harder than ascending to heaven. What's more, he loves to make his way to the alleys of pleasure houses. You'd better keep an eye on him, or he'll really bring a courtesan back to marry one day. Xiao Jiming knew that her stepmothers were all famous courtesans in Qidong. They would kick up such a row in the backyard all day long that she would always get a headache the moment she got home. That was why she had detested courtesans ever since she was young. Who can stop him if he really meets someone he fancies? Xiao Jiming felt like letting out a long sigh. He said with a headache, "Even 10 bulls won't be able to haul him home. You'd better prepare for rainy days." Qi Juin thought for a moment. Never mind about all the others, but her personality must not be too intense. Your Iji is gentle by nature. If he brings home someone with a temper, then Iji would have to suffer indignities every day, wouldn't she? Nothing has even begun to take shape yet. 3 Xiao Jiming suddenly laughed out loud. It's still too early. Marriages are the most unpredictable. Qi Juin laughed too. Perhaps someday he will see the light? Xiao Qia felt as though there was a chill on his back. He looked back warily and saw Shun Zichuan standing beside Zhao Hui, looking contemplative. I'll go to the Imperial Army office in a while to collect the waste token. Xiao Qia blocked the light in front of Shun Zichuan. Before the final deployment order of the Imperial bodyguards is given, you will have to follow me day and night. Day and night. Shun Zichuan repeated the words and looked up at him. Do I still have to lift the chamber pot for the second young master at night? If you want to, then sure. Xiao Qia took a step closer. I'm busy these few days. I have to stay at the residence behind the Imperial Army office. Shun Zichuan did not answer. Xiao Qia had already turned around to receive Xiao Jiming. The review of the Court of Judicial Review had yet to conclude when both the Hua and Pan residences were searched and seized. Li Jianheng took the opportunity to close off access to the Empress Dowager's Anxi Palace on the grounds that the Empress Dowager was troubled by worries to the point of anxiety. With some difficulty, enough money was finally gathered to make up for the shortfall in Li Bei's military fund for salaries and provisions. Xiao Fangxiu and Xiao Jiming could not stay for long, and so they left a few days after. Xiao Qia unexpectedly did not look reluctant to part with them. It was as if he had abandoned the ambitions he had during the autumn hunt after that night of inebriation. From time to time, Li Jianheng would bestow him with rewards, and each time, he would accept it with delight. Not only that, he also started to loaf on the job. Originally, the Imperial Army had the important task of conducting patrols. But he worked in fits and starts like the fisherman who fished for 3 days and dried the net for 2 days. For there was often no sight of him where he should be. The Ministry of War gradually began to voice their doubts about him as they grew more inclined to have him replaced. But Li Jianheng refused to agree and even used the tactics of making a scene and throwing his tantrum. He even went to the extent of almost falling out with the Vice Minister of the Ministry of War, who presented the petition. He flung away the Memorial 5 from the Vice Minister of the Ministry of War and said, Xiao Suan has made great contributions in coming to my rescue. Why isn't he up to being the Viceroy of the Imperial Army? It's not like he has bungled matters or held things up. I won't replace him. Both men reverted to the way they were before the autumn hunt, and Li Jianheng felt a little more relaxed. The Xiao Qia of that night was more like a figment of his imagination, while this man without an iota of decorum was his buddy. Li Jianheng also felt glad that Xiao Qia did not mention a word about returning to Li Bei. He was of the view that this was his buddy's consideration of his situation. There was really nothing he could do. And it was still possible to play while remaining in Kudu, wasn't it? Now that he had even become the emperor, Xiao Qia could throw his weight around as he liked given their relationship, no? So why return to Li Bei? How could that bitter cold land be as comfortable and carefree as in Kudu? When Xiao Qia wanted to head out of the city to race his horse, Li Jianheng approved it. When Xiao Qia wanted to expand the Imperial Army office, Li Jianheng approved it too. And when Xiao Qia wanted to be on duty for half a day and idle at home for the other half, Li Jianheng not only approved it, he even approved it with great delight. When both men had nothing to do, they would ride horses and play ball. Li Jianheng could not head for Donglong Street to fool around, but he could ask Xiao Qia over to listen to the Pipa Six together with him. That Mu Ru now lived in Mingli Hall. Li Jianheng originally thought that Xiao Qia would say a few words of admonishment. Instead, Xiao Qia said nothing and merely joined in the fun with him. It feels so fucking good to be an emperor. During the last reign in Kudu, Shi Guan was sentenced to execution by decapitation by the Court of Judicial Review. Because Shi Hongxian distributed his wealth and sought forgiveness, he got into Li Jianheng's good graces and was transferred to the Ministry of Revenue, where he took up a modest position. Shi Hongxian was originally adept at having fun, and this was just perfect for Li Jianheng, so Shi Hongxian would go looking for Li Jianheng every day to offer him suggestions on what and how to play. Shi Guan had only just been sentenced when Hua Xiqian committed suicide by biting off his tongue in the prison. In the testimony he gave, he shouldered all the crimes without so much a word implicating the Empress Dowager. At present, it was just Ji Lei and Pan Rugi who had yet to be sentenced. Hai Liangyi wanted to pry a confession out of these two men's mouths, but he never succeeded. It was not until the house was damp that Shen Zichuan returned. As soon as he opened the door, he saw an Eastern Pearl 7 on the table. Shen Zichuan closed the door. He had only just picked up the pearl in his hand when he heard Chen Yang knocking on the door. He opened the door, and Chen Yang said, "The Viceroy is calling for you." Shen Zichuan grasped the Eastern Pearl in his hand. The strip of cloth it came with was soaked. He said naturally, "I'll go once I change my clothes." Chen Yang said, "Don't bother. Just go like this. The Viceroy doesn't have the patience to wait for others." With that, he took a step aside, wanting to leave together with Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan could only let his hands drop and stride out of the door to leave with Chen Yang. Xiao Qie was wearing a cloak. When he saw him coming, he said, "Take the blade and come with me." Shen Zichuan went out of the door. It was only when Xiao Qie led the horse over that Shen Zichuan realized Chen Yang had not followed them. Xiao Qie got up the horse, and the gerfalcon shook the water droplets off its neck before landing on Xiao Qie's shoulder. Shen Zichuan could only follow after him. The horse left the city and braved the rain to head for the military drill grounds at Mount Feng. When they arrived at the drill grounds, it was empty and void of people. Xiao Qie removed the reins for Lang Tao Shui Jin and gave it a pat to let it run around to play by itself. Meng flew under the veranda, unwilling to soak in the rain any longer. "Take off your clothes." Xiao Qie turned around and said to Shen Zichuan as he untied his cloak. Shen Zichuan held the blade in his arms and raised his chin. The water trickled down the front of his clothes, exposing that fair, delicate neck of his. Xiao Qie felt just like a person seeing a cat every time he looked at Shen Zichuan's neck. He always could not help wanting to give it a few rubs. What the heck is wrong with him? He had already taken off his outer garment while he was thinking. When he saw Shen Zichuan still not moving, he urged again, "What are you standing there blankly for? Strip quickly." Shen Zichuan raised his fingers and placed them on his own waist belt. He glanced at him and said slowly, "If I strip, there will be nothing left." Chapter 31, Nape. Chapter 31, Nape, then all the more for you to strip. Xiao Qie took off his arm guards and set them on the wooden ledge under the eaves together with his cloak and outer garment. The soldiers in the inner hall of the military drill grounds wanted to come over to pay their obeisances, but he raised a hand to stop them. He turned around to look calmly at Shen Zichuan and said, "That'd be just perfect for me to see and experience for myself the difference between a body trained by the Ji clan's mental cultivation techniques and mine. Since we are from the same school of martial arts." Shen Zichuan set Longli blade at the side. "Then the stances and moves are naturally the same." "Not necessarily so," Xiao Qie said. "My Shifu incorporated an external boxing style one into it, so it was already quite different from the Ji clan boxing style by the time it was imparted to me. If they were identical, you wouldn't have been totally oblivious of the fact that night. If you want to exchange pointers, then just say so." Shen Zichuan slid a leg out in an arc. "Why speak of stripping? You sound just like a beast." In that very instant, Xiao Qie felt as though Shen Zichuan had suddenly turned into another person. Rainwater and mountain fog overlapped, washing out Shen Zichuan's facial features. In contrast, His slender body became all the more striking. My wish is to be a beast in human clothing. Xiao Qie strode down the stairs and stepped into the curtain of rain. I gave you a kick 5 years ago. Do you hate me for it? Shen Zichuan said, If I say yes, wouldn't that mean I have been tossing and turning, having sleepless nights thinking of you? So nope. I don't hate you at all. Xiao Qie struck up a starting stance and said, What a pity. If you hate me, then you can get your revenge today. Amid the biting cold wind, Xiao Qie slowly added on, That is, if you can. Raindrops came pitter-pattering down, bouncing for a few steps before spreading their wings on the veranda. At this moment, Xiao Qie sprang up in the rain to make his move first. He threw out a punch, only to strike at empty air. But the vigor and strength of his blow sent the water droplets flying and splashing onto Shen Zichuan's cheeks. Having missed his target with that strike, Xiao Qie swept his arm to the left. Shen Zichuan blocked his blow with a lightning move of his hand. When both men's arms collided, Shen Zichuan frowned from the pain and retreated a few steps back. Ji Clan's boxing style. Shen Zichuan pursed his lips into a tight line, but laughed out loud instead. Shifu's boxing style was steady and robust. Xiao Er too obviously lacked the steadiness but was far more ferocious. His strength was too astonishing. Just a collision like this, and the impact had already numbed Shen Zichuan's arm. The Ji Clan's boxing style was meant to be imparted to this kind of man, because his internal and external constitution all made it particularly suitable for him to train in it. Xiao Qie's physique granted him the qualification to hold the various heroes in contempt. But was receiving an unfair advantage from heaven the crux to determining victory? What Shen Zichuan did not believe the most was the fate heaven decided for them. Shen Zichuan raised a leg up, and raindrops suddenly went splashing towards Xiao Qie. His leg sweep 3 was quick and brutal. Any other ordinary person would home in on the advantageous and avoid the dangerous. Thus, they would first evade an incoming attack. But Xiao Qie just had to meet difficulties head-on. He lifted his arm to block and fend off Shen Zichuan's leg with a thud, then strode a steady step forward. It was too late for Shen Zichuan to retract his leg. Facing off Xiao Qie was just like facing off a tiger or a leopard poised for action. A wavering heart, an evasive gaze, an avoidant stance. As long as he showed any signs of these, Xiao Qie would instantly storm in. He would never miss any opportunity to attack his opponent. Letting Xiao Qie go on the defensive was much easier to deal with than letting Xiao Qie go on the offensive. Shen Zichuan exerted force with his leg, and the pressure slightly slowed down Xiao Qie's movement. In a twinkling of an eye, Shen Zichuan was lifted into the air by Xiao Qie. He leaned his entire body back, supported his weight with both arms on the ground, and straightened back up like a soft willow in the wind. The moment he sprang back to his feet, he swept his leg out again. Once again, Xiao Qie bent his arm to block it. This time, his eyes were calm as he said, An ant trying to shake a tree. For should I diss you for overrating your abilities, or should I commend you for your courage? Xiao Qie had only just said this when he backhandedly grabbed Shen Zichuan's calf. His shoulders sank as he attempted to flip Shen Zichuan over to the ground. Having already been swung up, Shen Zichuan made use of the momentum and stepped on Xiao Qie's shoulder. That amazing waist strength of his came into play again as his legs twisted around Xiao Qie's neck and spun him over to the ground together with him. Xiao Qie's palm slid straight up along this straightness and hooked around the spot that had bent into an arch earlier. The suppleness in his palm was so smooth it was incredible. He simply wanted to touch Shen Zichuan, because he could not fathom it. Whether it was the Ji Clan's boxing style or the Ji Clan's broadsword style, as long as a person trained all the year round, his body muscles would definitely and visibly develop. But Shen Zichuan not only concealed it to the extent it looked as though he had never trained in martial arts, but also to the extent that both Chen Yang and Xiao Tianyao were taken in, thinking him to be morbidly weak and sick due to a deficiency of vital energy and blood. 5 Shen Zichuan lifted his body off the ground and slammed his elbow towards Xiao Qia's head. Xiao Qia tilted his head to dodge the blow. He held on tight to Shen Zichuan's waist and pinned him against his own chest, then felt his way up from the latter's waist to his chest. The Eastern Pearl 6 was still hidden in his bosom. The moment Shen Zichuan's back bumped into Xiao Qia, he clasped hold of Xiao Qia's arm and flung him over his shoulder into the rain. The spray of water instantly wetted his hair. Shen Zichuan wanted to retreat, but Xiao Qia unexpectedly hooked him with his long leg and sent him tripping towards himself. Shen Zichuan's body was already tilting towards Xiao Qia, but in that very instant, he trod on the water and gradually stabilized himself just like the reverberations of the strings on a chain. 7 Xiao Qia straightened up and threw himself forward again. His hook struck at empty air, but he touched a lock of Shen Zichuan's long hair that had fluttered up in the rain as the latter spun around in a retreat to evade his blow. The rain-soaked lock of hair longingly slipped past Xiao Qia's fingertips as if wanting for more, causing him to feel a wet itch. Not fighting anymore. Xiao Qia suddenly clenched his fist and looked at Shen Zichuan. The rain has gotten heavier. Shen Zichuan looked back and asked, "Have you touched enough?" Without batting an eyelid, Xiao Qia said, "Not soft, but not hard either." Shen Zichuan said a little mockingly, "I thought you were going to tear off all my clothes." "If I really wanted to," Xiao Qia said, "we would be bearing all of ourselves to each other right now." 8 With that, he raised his other hand and waved the thin blade Shen Zichuan always carried with him. The Ji clan's mental cultivation techniques need to be paired with the broadsword. Even if you use these things every day, you will not be able to defeat me in this lifetime. If you can't beat me, then how are you going to take revenge? Shen Zichuan's thin blades were originally hidden on the outside of his thighs. He glanced down, then looked at Xiao Qia again. He said, "Fighting and killing will hurt relationships. Isn't it more pleasant to play the fool together?" Xiao Qia said, "I only fear that you are hiding a blade behind your smile 9 to stab me when I'm the least unaware. Only the word lust has a blade above it." 10 Shen Zichuan spread out his hands. "Second young master is a gentleman. What's there to fear?" Xiao Qia placed the thin blade in Shen Zichuan's palm and said unhurriedly, "I've just said that I'm a beast in human clothing. Why do you always see me as a gentleman?" Shen Zichuan wanted to retract his hand. But Xiao Qia grabbed him by the wrist and said, "Seeing as you are so obedient today, this second young master will take you someplace that'll make you feel good." "Viceroy," Shen Zichuan suddenly said with a severe countenance, "please, I'm not into men. Let us just part on good terms without hard feelings. Why pester me to such an extent?" Xiao Qia was momentarily dumbfounded, then he turned his head to the side and saw a whole bunch of Imperial Army soldiers clinging all over the doors and windows of the military drill grounds inner hall to watch the show. The vice-commander of the Imperial Army was the scar-faced man who led his men to kill the 8 great training divisions that night. He clutched the window and took the lead to jeer. "Fighting like a hoodlum taking liberties. Viceroy, what the hell? You never smiled at us when you lecture us every day." "That was pestering," he said. They winked meaningfully at each other and started heckling. "How could that be the same? The Viceroy is 23 now, and he has no wife at home to dote on. So all the energy in him has to be expended on someone else. It's not the same." Xiao Qia sensed that Shen Zichuan was going to run, and so he pulled the latter hard towards himself. He said with a superficial smile, "That's right. I'm into pestering others. Lanzhao, why are you running? I'm not done pestering you. The reason you aren't into men is that you have yet to get a sweet taste of them. Second young master will teach you." When it came to being shameless and stupid, he, Xiao Qia, would only concede defeat to Li Jianheng, who wouldn't know the trick of forcing yourself on someone else. Shen Zichuan was really belittling him by trying to use this kind of cheap trick to embarrass him. Without giving Shen Zichuan the chance to reply, Xiao Qia dragged him away. Behind them, Tantai, who touched his scar and asked the soldier beside him, "Who's that man? I've never seen him in our imperial army before." "His surname is Shen." The man beside him winked. "The one from Zhongbua." The smile on Tantai, whose face cooled. He propped himself up with his arms to stick his head out, then looked back and said, "He's that fucking Shen who brought disaster upon Zhongbua? What's the viceroy doing with him? Shen Wei caused the death of so many people. Even 8 heads of his aren't enough for us to behead. The prince of Jianxing's manor has already been wrecked by others. Yet he's still eating and living well in Kudu. The orphans who have lost their parents on the Chashire River frontline are still gnawing on mud. Fuck this. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Xiao Qia led Shen Zichuan up Mount Feng. There was a narrow flight of stone steps in the mountain. The stream soaked through the soles of their shoes, chilling them to their bones. But Xiao Qia did not even look back as he parted the maple leaves dripping with water and made his way onto a path. Their shoes sank into the mud they trod upon as they walked farther in with uneven steps. Less than an hour later, Xiao Qia stopped in his tracks. The thatched cottage in the misty rain was small and exquisite, but it did not look like a place to live in. He turned sideways and said to Shen Zichuan, "You saved me once in the Nanlin hunting grounds. As a reward, I'll share half of this place with you." "The reward I want is cold, hard cash," Shen Zichuan said, "not soaking in a bath together. Money and fame are merely worldly possessions." Xiao Qia stretched out both arms to lift the fabric curtain and enter. He stood at the entrance to strip off his attire and shouted, "This place is one that even the emperor's old man himself had never enjoyed before." Shen Zichuan lifted the curtain and saw Xiao Qia's bare upper body. The contours of the muscles on the back of his shoulders were clean and neat, like a physique sculpted with a chisel. Other than a small clothes rack with curvy raised ends 11 in the house, there was only a hot spring that led out. Xiao Qia hung up his clothes on one side of the clothes rack. The other end was obviously reserved for him. Xiao Qia took off his boots, looked back at Shen Zichuan and said, "Do you want to turn your back to me and strip, or do you want to strip while watching me?" Pulling at his waist belt, Shen Zichuan turned his back. The Eastern pearl landed in his palm, and he conveniently put it away into his sleeve. The gaze on his back never shifted away. Shen Zichuan's hand paused for a moment before he pulled off his own outer garment. Xiao Qia watched that garment slip to the ground. The fairness of Shen Zichuan's neck finally extended downward, very much like pear blossom rice paper immersed in moonlight. His back looked so thin and smooth. Xiao Qia thought, "That's right." It was as if he had been staring at Shen Zichuan's nape all for this very moment. How could a man's nape produce such breathtaking beauty? This was beyond everything Xiao Qia had seen and heard in the past. It not only surprised him, but also baffled him. The fangs of the little wolf from Libei were sharp, but he had never bitten such a neck before, nor had he ever bitten such a man. His gaze slid down from Shen Zichuan's nape with a strength that felt like a caress, moving along that slightly heaving contour as it made its way farther down and down. Smooth. Xiao Qia's mouth felt parched. He suddenly returned to his senses with a jolt and hurriedly averted his gaze. "I must be mad," he thought. There were so many courtesans on Donglong Street. Which one of them wasn't a genuine beauty? Why was he looking at a man's back as though he was burning with hunger? Xiao Qia used to turn his nose up at people who were seduced by beautiful women, because the elders and seniors he admired were all men of resolute will. Every one of them could be said to be a true gentleman with the air of a man untempted by lust even with a beautiful woman in their laps. 12 just like his father, his brother, his Shifu. The famous generals of the world changed generation after generation. But he had never admired Qi Xiu before precisely because Qi Xiu was a lecher. After the battle in Zhongbua, the one he loathed the most was Shen Wei, and it was because Shen Wei was not only guilty of monstrous crimes, but was also lecherous. But at this moment, he felt a little dizzy as that bestial instinct, captivated by beauty and stirred by desires, once again showed signs of rearing its head. Xiao Qie strained himself to rein in his gaze and vividly felt the contradiction between his mind and his desire. He did not love this man, but because of this man's loveliness, the desire to embrace him, ravage him, and tear at him with his teeth sprang up within him for the second time. "Aren't you going in?" Shen Zichuan was completely oblivious as he turned back and approached him, unperturbed. Xiao Qie responded in an angry voice. "Duh!" Chapter 32, Mountain Night Stay. Chapter 32, Mountain night stay. Thick, steaming mist, coupled with the drumming sound of the rain. Shen Zichuan was about to enter and soak in the water. As he bent down, Xiao Qie, who was behind him, got a clear look at the curvy contours of his waist and buttocks, which became more and more conspicuous with each of his movements. Has muscles. Very toned. But he did not look like a martial arts practitioner the slightest. Because the way Xiao Qie saw it, he did not have that threatening vibe. Shen Zichuan submerged himself into the water. His legs, which had soaked in the rain until it was cold, gradually warmed up. Xiao Qie entered the water and leaned far away from him at the other end. Shen Zichuan asked in astonishment, "Why are you hiding so far away?" "It pleases me to." Xiao Qie roughly folded the wet handkerchief to cover his eyes, then put up his arms without looking at Shen Zichuan again. But after a moment, Xiao Qie found it inappropriate, so he raised his hand to pull off the handkerchief and stared fixedly at Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan felt that Xiao was very much like his gerfalcon right this moment. It was as if he would start going on the offensive with just a little jab. "What do you want to see?" Shen Zichuan's expression was as warm as the spring breeze as he used the tone of one cajoling a child eating candied hawthorns one on the street. "Tell me. I'll let you see." Xiao Qie bent up a leg and pulled off the only remaining cover around his waist without batting an eyelid. He said, "I've already touched them all earlier." Shen Zichuan sank a little lower into the water, exposing only a pair of eyes to look at him. Xiao Qie felt even more irritable being sized up by that gaze of his. He said, "What?" Shen Zichuan revealed his lower jaw and replied, "You were in a good mood earlier. Why the sudden change?" "My mood right now is also pretty good," Xiao Qie said. "Soaking in the bath means one can shut up, there is no need to talk. Can you stop looking up at me like that?" Shen Zichuan slowly lifted his body, and the water trickled down along his chest. His scattered hair spread out like ink saturating the water. It was as if he was a magnolia flower climbing out among this water mist. Xiao Qie could not stand it anymore. Why had he thought of flower? He watched with wide-open eyes as Shen Zichuan came closer to him. He could even smell Shen Zichuan's scent when the latter sat beside him. Not fragrant, mild scent. "Feel like catching a few more whiff." Xiao Qie retracted the arms he had put up at the edges and suddenly pulled over a garment from the clothes rack. He stuffed all of it into the water to cover up his waist. After doing this, he looked calmly at Shen Zichuan and said, "What? Surprised? I'm afraid you might get funny ideas at the sensual sight of second young master, hence the cover." "Then I thank you," Shen Zichuan said with a displeased expression. Xiao Qie lowered his head, only to realize that the clothing he had pulled off belonged to Shen Zichuan. "For washing my clothes on my behalf," Shen Zichuan said. "Now I'll have to soak in here until tomorrow." The awkward silence permeated through the air rapidly as both men looked at each other. Outside, the wind rustled amid the cold and dismal autumn rain. After a long while, Xiao Qie said, "This clothing won't dry even if we leave it be. Meng can go and call Chen Yang over." With that, he raised his head and whistled. There was a moment's silence in the hot spring. Neither Lang Tao Xuejin nor Meng came. Xiao Qie whistled again. Outside, Meng shrank its head under its wing and ignored him. Such a heavy rain, it had absolutely no wish to fly out and get itself wet. The silence seemed endless. Eventually, Shen Zichuan said, "I'll wring it dry." Shao Chia pressed the clothes back down, and said while gnashing his teeth at him, "Wait a moment." Both men were stranded in the hot springs for a night. By the time their clothes dried, it was already the hour of Mao. Tu Shinzichuan finally put on his clothes at long last. As he secured his waist belt, he could still sense that ravenous gaze of a tiger eyeing its prey. But he said nothing and feigned unawareness. Shao Chia lifted the hanging screen. It was still dark outside. The air was thick with mountain fog and the scent of dampness after a rain. It was inconvenient to head down the mountain, as the stone stairs were all covered in thin ice. Both men moved in a single file, with one in front and one at the back. The military drill grounds occupy the southwestern side of Mount Feng. Shenzichuan surveyed the place from above. Although it's very close to Kudu, its view is completely blocked by Mount Feng. The 8th Great Training Division won't conduct their patrols here. Your location choice is really excellent. I wouldn't have chosen this land if not for Mount Feng. Shao Chia pushed aside the maple branches and turned back to indicate to Shenzichuan to make his way over under his arm. Shenzichuan passed under it. The scenery before him suddenly opened up as all the obstructions turned to mist. He could see the Imperial Army's military drill grounds clearly. There were already squads running around the grounds. The Imperial Army did not make a move during the autumn hunt. Shenzichuan sized it up for a moment and said, "But I can see that they are all fully equipped. Hua Xiqin is dead now. The moment the seizure of his assets following the autumn hunt is concluded, the Chief Surveillance Bureau will be coming for you." Shao Chia obviously could not afford to raise 20,000 Imperial Army soldiers based on his salary alone, and he could not misappropriate the military salary and provisions of the Libe armored cavalry either. But going by the annual budget the Ministry of Revenue allocated to him before the autumn hunt, the Imperial Army obviously would not have the money to establish themselves on such a scale. Shi Guan died because he could not explain himself. And now it was time for them to be demanding answers from Shao Chia. Shao Chia said, "Let them come." As for where the money had come from, he did not speak further on the issue, and Shenzichuan did not ask again. After a while, Shao Chia said, "Many errands from the Ministry of Works requiring manual labor were all handed to the Imperial Army to be carried out. Since 5 years ago, every sum of money paid out to the Imperial Army for the assignments were all recorded down in black and white in the account book. Even if the Chief Surveillance Bureau investigates it, they won't be able to find anything nefarious." It was for this reason that Shao Chia became the infamous debt collector in the Ministry of Revenue. All of them thought he was asking for money to spend on women and wine. They did not know that he was actually saving money over the years, and that the only account he had that could be said to be an extravagant expense was money for wine. Li Jianheng might be muddle-headed, but he was generous when it came to his buddies. Every time he invited Shao Chia to Donglong Street, he was the one who paid out of his own pocket for the girls and for the feasts to treat his bunch of disreputable friends. Li Jianheng lived off government coffers, and he had no principal wife to keep him in line. If he had no money, he would ask the palace for it. Emperor Xianda had never been stingy with him when it came to him spending money. Even if he had to take the funds from his own coffers, he would also give him the money. So, Li Jianheng never lacked money. Shao Chia did not manage to return to Libe, but he had never resented Li Jianheng for it, because he knew it better than anyone else that Li Jianheng regarded these disreputable friends of his as his real brothers. Thinking to this point, Shao Chia said, "The reason the Empress Dowager saved you is naturally because she wants to use you. If all is calm, you can perhaps enjoy a steady rise to the top in the Imperial bodyguards." But the former emperor suddenly started resisting. The Empress Dowager has gone looking for you, hasn't she? Shenzichuan met Shao Chia's eyes. He must not evade it. Not even for a moment. Shao Chia had an extremely keen sense of smell. He only had to show a trace of guilt and Shao Chia could definitely tell. Shenzichuan replied with certainty, "Never." The chilly wind brushed past them and swept up the hems of their clothes. Xiao Qie slowly exhaled cold air and smiled unconcernedly. Then your luck is pretty good. It was already daybreak by the time they returned to Kudu. Xiao Qie said from atop his horse, I have to rush over for the morning court session. 3. You head back first. Shin Zichuan nodded and watched as Xiao Qie spurred his horse on to leave. When he returned to the abode, he did not see Qin Yang. Presumably, the latter had already left to wait for Xiao Qie at the palace gate. Shin Zichuan took out the eastern pearl from his sleeve and held it between his fingertips to scrutinize it under the faint light. But before he could remove the strip of cloth, he paused. When he undressed, he had placed the eastern pearl into his right sleeve. But now it was from the left sleeve he took the eastern pearl out of. Shin Zichuan clicked his tongue lightly and frowned. Xiao Qie arrived at the palace gate, dismounted, and made his way into his family's horse carriage, where he quickly changed into his official robe. Qin Yang had also prepared breakfast, and the porridge was still hot. Xiao Qie drank a bowl. I went to the military drill grounds last night to look for you, but you weren't there. Qin Yang kneeled beside the curtain and whispered, It isn't stable in Kudu these days. Someone ought to go along with you when you venture outdoors. Xiao Qie set aside the bowl and said, Get someone to keep a close watch on Shin Lanzhou at all times. Qin Yang acknowledged his order and said, It's all our own men outside the abode. As long as he ventures outdoors, he definitely will not escape your eyes. It's just that the Hua clan has been defeated. Viceroy, what advantage is there for us to watch him closely now? Xiao Qie did not answer. He did not look too good as he lowered his eyes for a long time. It was not until Qin Yang mentioned the morning court session that he wiped his hands with a clean handkerchief and said, I find that man unpredictable. If you look at him now, can you tell that he knows a little martial arts? Qin Yang replied, He looks clearly weaker than he was when he joined the imperial bodyguards. If Viceroy had not spoken of his help during the autumn hunt, I'd definitely not be able to tell. But if Viceroy gets Zhao Hui to take a look, perhaps he might be able to catch something. Zhao Hui met him face to face the last time he entered the capital, and he did not see anything off about him. Xiao Qie said, That body of his voice stopped abruptly. After a while, he continued, Send a letter to Li Bei immediately and request Shifu's presence here. Stunned, Qin Yang said, You want to ask? No matter what method he used to cover it up, it will definitely not escape Shifu's eyes. Xiao Qie twirled his thumb ring around and said apathetically, Besides, there's something I need to speak with Shifu. Li Jianheng shelved the morning court session today. He had yet to sleep his fill when he heard Shuanglu reporting to him that Hai Liangyi was kneeling just outside. Li Jianheng was immediately wide awake, but Mu Ru, who was in his arms, was still asleep. For a moment, he could not free himself, so he could only raise his neck and instruct Shuanglu in a whisper, Go! Send him away. Shuanglu had only gone out for a while before he returned to kneel. He said, Secretariat Elders said he must see Your Majesty. This slave said Your Majesty is still asleep, so Secretariat Elders said he will kneel and wait for Your Majesty. Li Jianheng panicked. Mu Ru had only just woken up in his embrace when he hurriedly coaxed her, My dear, get dressed quickly and go to Chunming Palace at the back for your meal. I have to receive and meet the Secretariat Elder. Mu Ru was dainty and delicate, with black hair like a waterfall. At this moment, she did not pester him or make a commotion and simply dressed herself obediently. Once she was done, she glanced seductively at Li Jianheng with her adoring, affectionate eyes and helped him up as if the honor he had bestowed on her was too much for her to take. Li Jianheng loved this look of hers to bits. He tugged at her hand, reluctant to part, wanting so much to hold her on his knees while holding court. Next time, Li Jianheng kissed her several times in a row. Next time, I'll not ask you to retreat. He embraced her and spoke for quite a while. It was only when Shuanglu entered again to hurry him up that Li Jianheng reluctantly let Mu Ru go. Hai Liangyi entered with a solemn expression and kowtowed. Li Jianheng sat on the dragon throne and said, "Please rise, Secretariat Elder. Please rise quickly." Hai Liangyi remained in place and kowtowed again. Not getting a response, Li Jianheng looked left and right, feeling his face burning. He coughed twice and said, "I've caught a cold these 2 days, so I wanted to sleep in a little longer in the morning." Hai Liangyi said, "This old subject has heard that your Majesty has been diligently holding night courts. It's just that there has been no responses to all the memorials that have been submitted. After giving the matter careful thought, this old subject has come to admonish your Majesty in the face. Your Majesty is now in the prime of life and at the height of power. If your Majesty exercises diligence in governing the state, then a bright, thriving future will be close at hand once the depressing atmosphere from before has been swept away." Li Jianheng let out a few dry laughs and said, "I guess so, but your Majesty resides deep in the inner palace surrounded by castrated traitors serving him. If I indulge your Majesty and let your Majesty be, then your Majesty will over time turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to advice and stray far from current politics." Hai Liangyi said resolutely and firmly, "This subject has heard that Shuanglu, the eunuch personally serving your Majesty, has been bribed into staffing plenty of dubious and low-down people around your Majesty. According to the palace rules, anyone who isn't acting on imperial orders yet has the audacity to lead outsiders into the palace should be flogged to death." Shuanglu fell to his knees with a thud and looked at Li Jianheng in terror. He said, "Your Majesty, your Majesty, Mingli Hall is a just and sacred place in this world. How can we tolerate eunuchs making a din here?" Hai Liangyi looked at Li Jianheng. "Your Majesty." Li Jianheng's chest was pounding hard. He looked at the stern Hai Liangyi and recalled the extreme danger of that night. His palms were sweating, and he wiped them on his dragon robe like a loser. He did not even dare to say a word in reply. The guards outside had already entered to drag Shuanglu away. Shuanglu cried out as he slid across the floor, "Your Majesty, your Majesty!" His crime, Li Jianheng looked at Shuanglu. "His crime is not punishable by death, your Majesty," Hai Liangyi said firmly. "Pan Rugi formed an eunuch clique and colluded with Hua Xiqian to stir up havoc within and outside Kudu. It's now the time to nip it in the bud as a warning to others. Not only that, promiscuous members of the imperial harem who seduce and bewitch the emperor in an attempt to sway him should also be flogged to death." Trembling with fear, Li Jianheng said, I wouldn't dare. With such a virtuous subject like Secretariat Elder to supervise and prompt me every day, how would I dare to act arbitrarily and fool around? Secretariat Elder mustn't be taken in by those groundless rumors." But Hai Liangyi said mercilessly, "There's no smoke without fire. Your Majesty, we must not allow beautiful women who are the sources of troubles to remain." Li Jianheng was really scared now. How could he bear to let Mu Ru die? He rose to his feet in a panic, cutting a sorry figure as he said, "Secretariat Elder, I've realized my mistakes. Shuanglu has served me for many years. Just drop the matter today, and I'll surely administer affairs of state with due diligence in the future." Hai Liangyi kowtowed, deferring to him when all had been said and done to preserve some of his dignity. Li Jianheng held on to the table and listened to the sound of flogging outside. Blow after blow, one after the other. It was as if the one being hit was himself. He looked at Hai Liangyi with mixed feelings. There was aggrievement and also fear. Xiao Qie was just in time to see others splashing water and wiping the floor when he entered. Bloodstains spread under his feet. They were so vividly red that it was terrifying. All the eunuchs in Mingli Hall were quietly kneeling outside. Not one of them dared to raise their heads. Xiao Qie strode inside, where Li Jianheng was sitting stupefied like a piece of wood on the dragon throne. When Li Jianheng saw Xiao Qie enter, He stared blankly at him for a moment before he burst out bawling. Li Jianheng smashed objects around as he cried and shouted, "What kind of emperor is this? To think someone would point a finger to my nose and humiliate me like this. Which land under the heavens isn't land of the emperor? 5. What's wrong with me bestowing favors on a woman? Where's the wrong in it?" Chapter 33. Uncle and Nephew. Chapter 33. Uncle and Nephew. After Li Jianheng was done flinging stuff around, he covered his face and sobbed. Xiao Qia avoided the shattered fragments and kneeled. When Li Jianheng's mood calmed a little after a while, he said, "Get up. There's no need for you to kneel like this. You and I are buddies. Doing this will only make us feel estranged." Xiao Qia rose to his feet and said, "The Secretariat Elder is merely upright and frank by nature." Li Jianheng was in low spirits as he covered his face for a long time. He said, "They come here every 2 or 3 days to settle accounts, all of which I've permitted. Even when money flows out like water, I've never said a word. I've been on tenterhooks all day long these days to the point I've lost appetite. It hasn't been a good time for me. Can't I even ask for a few days to take a breather now that Hua Xiqin is dead and Ji Lei is about to be executed? Suen, you have no idea how dissatisfied they are with me sitting here. As long as there's another choice in this world, they would never want me." At this point, he felt sad again. But when have I ever thought of being the emperor? They were the ones who pushed me into becoming one. And now they are also the ones to admonish me. The censor of the Chief Surveillance Bureau keeps watching me every day. Even when I venture outdoors to appreciate flowers, they still had to submit memorials to reproach me in those erudite ways of theirs. Never mind if he killed a mere eunuch, but why can't he, Hai Rinshi, show me due respect and give me some face? At the very least, I'm also the Emperor of Dazhou. The more Li Jianheng spoke, the angrier he became. But there was nothing else on the table that he could smash, thus he pounded his own thigh in indignation. He made Mu Ru out to be a contemptible person, but it's not like they are noble and virtuous themselves. In the past when we were drinking in Donglong Street, which of them did not look dignified only for them to turn out to be scoundrels when they took off their pants? Mu Ru was originally picked out by me from a clan with a clean background. If it weren't for that dog Xiaofuzi who got in the way, would she have fallen into that traitor Pan's hands? My heart aches so much it's going to break. Xiao Qia merely listened and said nothing as Li Jianheng gave vent to all his grievances. By the time Li Jianheng stopped his tirade, his anger had already mostly subsided. If they truly treat me as the emperor and respect me, then I'd be willing to be diligent in my study. My imperial elder brother entrusted this vast empire to me. I want to be a sovereign of a flourishing era too. Li Jianheng said with aggrievement. Hai Rinshi just doesn't think much of me. It was only then Xiao Qia said, on the contrary. It was precisely because the Secretariat Elder has high hopes for your Majesty that he dared to admonish your Majesty so severely. Your Majesty must not bear a grudge against him. Your Majesty has to know that Secretariat Elder Hai is equally stern and exacting with that unpolished jade Yuanjua Yao Wenyu. Skeptical, Li Jianheng asked, "Really?" Xiao Qia said, "If this wasn't the case, then why would the Secretariat Elder kill Shuanglu today?" Li Jianheng pondered it over for a moment, then said, "True that. If Hailiangi did not think much of him, why would he keep asking his opinions on every matter?" Li Jianheng recalled back to the day when he had just ascended to the throne. After Hailiangi learned that the Empress Dowager had sent him snacks, he had specifically instructed him in private to change all his spoons and chopsticks into silver. One Hailiangi was an inflexible man who conducted himself seriously in both speech and manner. But he was different from Hua Xiqin. He has no disciples, only a student, Yao Wenyu. As Hailiangi wanted to avoid rousing suspicion, Yao Wenyu had still yet to enter the government to become an official despite being so talented. Hailiangi had never joined any clique in the Grand Secretariat, and he was also the only one who staked all he had and charged out to save Emperor Xianda at the Nanlin hunting grounds. He was the lone minister too mentioned in the books, difficult like a steep precipice, and upright like a lofty branchless tree. While Li Jianheng was thinking back on it, Shao Qia was thinking about it too. One thing Li Jianheng said was clear, and that was, as long there was another choice in this world, the one to ascend to the dragon throne today would not be him, Li Jianheng. But even Emperor Xianda could not do anything about it, because Li Jianheng was perhaps the one and only candidate they had in this world. Since they had given him his support, then they had to teach and guide him. Dazhou was a nation currently beset by difficulties. It might seem as if a wave of troubles had just calmed in Kudu, but in truth, the storm had already begun to stir again. All the exceedingly loyal ministers with Hai Liangyi at the head were now all looking at Li Jianheng. In their eyes, he was perhaps a hopeless case, but Hai Liangyi had raised both of his hands to support and prop Li Jianheng up with that old back of his, wanting him to hang on, to turn over a new leaf, and to be an emperor who would be able to leave his good name in history. Shao Qia and the civil officials had never gotten along with one another, because the central administration in Kudu feared the military power at the frontiers. These people were not only the reason for the invisible cage in which he was trapped, but they were also men of indomitable will and integrity in Dazhou who could still hobble on forward. Military commanders were not afraid of death, because they couldn't. Civil officials were not afraid of death, because they were conscientious. Li Jianheng was used to being fawned upon. He needed a teacher like Hai Liangyi who could castigate the contemporary failings of the times. When all is said and done, Lady Mu 3 doesn't have a status. If your Majesty's mind is truly set, then why not have a long heart-to-heart talk with the Secretariat Elder? This is the time when Dazhou needs a continuous line of imperial heirs. As long as your Majesty can speak to him with honesty and sincerity, the Secretariat Elder will definitely not fob your Majesty off. Finally, Shao Qia said, as for Ji Lei and Pan Rugi, I heard that the Court of Judicial Review has yet to sentence them? At the moment, Li Jianheng was occupied with thoughts of all that was good with Hai Liangyi. So he nodded absent-mindedly and replied, the accounts don't tally. They still need another retrial. The eastern pearl was hollow. When Shen Zichuan hooked the thin fabric strip out of it, the writing on it was already smudged from the soaking. He burned away the fabric strip. Every one of Shao Qia's actions last night was on full display right before his eyes. Perhaps that man had touched the eastern pearl, but it was impossible for him to see what was written inside. Nevertheless, Shao Qia's suspicions must have been roused. Shen Zichuan had answered that question on Mount Feng wrong. Shao Qia had even told him the source of the Imperial Army accounts, all because he was waiting for him to tell him the truth frankly. Yet, he had denied it with absolute certainty. Shen Zichuan decocted the medicine and drank it in one gulp. The bitter taste pervaded his mouth. He endured the bitterness, just like the anguish he revisited every day and night. At last, he let out a mocking smile, wiped his mouth, and lay down to sleep. He dreamed again. In the dream, the cold wind was still howling at the Chaucer sinkhole. He was no longer lying at the bottom, but standing alone at the edge of the pit, overlooking those 40,000 soldiers who were struggling like ants to survive. The Biantia cavalry surrounded the sinkhole like the black tide in the pitch-dark night. They blotted out the sky and the earth, engulfing all the Zhongbui garrison's troops' chances of survival, and turned this place into a slaughterhouse. A hand reached out among the churning waves of withered bones. Ji Mu stretched out his arrow-covered upper body like a puppet and sobbed as he called out to Shen Zichuan, "Go hurts so much." It was as if Shen Zichuan was a statue carved in clay or wood. He could not move, nor could he shout. His breathing quickened, and he was drenched in cold sweat as he clenched his teeth tightly. The leader of the Biantia cavalry was wearing a helmet. That hair fluttering in the wind had already turned a shade of a deep red in Shen Zichuan's recurring nightmare. He lifted his arm and pointed lightly at the sinkhole, and the arrows behind him all started falling one after another like a swarm of locusts. They stabbed into the men's bodies in dense clusters, piercing through flesh, spattering warm blood all over. The heavy snow all over the sky turned red too. Shen Zichuan watched Ji Mu fall into the bloody mud before he was swallowed up by a sticky red wave. His hands were cold. The blood on it was also cold. Shen Zichuan woke up. He sat up with his back to the light by the window, as though nothing had happened. He lowered his head and went silent for a moment, then he got out of bed to get dressed. The guards lurking in the courtyard watched Shen Zichuan step out of his room to eat his meal before heading to the bathhouse. After an hour, the guard who had never taken his eyes off the bathhouse frowned and asked the man beside him, "Why isn't he out yet?" Two men exchanged glances and smelled a rat at the same time. When the guards rushed into the bathhouse, all they saw was the neatly stacked clothes. Shen Zichuan was long gone. Shi Hongxian had booked Boer Tavern to invite others to tea. He sat until he needed to answer the call of nature, so he got up to head to the latrine. He had only just stepped out of the door, and had not walked a few steps in the corridor when someone patted him from behind. Shi Hongxian looked back and almost took a few steps back. Then he said, "How did you? Why are you always coming and going like a shadow? A lot has been going on lately." Shen Zichuan poured cold tea in passing. The reason Ji Lei and Pan Rugi have yet to be sentenced in the third trial by the Court of Judicial Review is because Hai Liangyi and Shuexiuzhua have yet to pry out whatever they wanted from those two men's mouths. Am I right? Shi Hongxian glanced around, then whispered, "You want to kill Ji Lei, but what can you do with everyone's eyes on this case? The reach of Hua faction case is too widespread, and there are too many people who are afraid of being implicated by those two. It's precisely to prevent them from dying a sudden and inexplicable death that Hai Liangyi told the men to take strict precautions when standing guard. You won't be able to strike." "I'm not going to." Shen Zichuan smiled derisively at Shi Hongxian. "But I have a way to get Ji Lei to talk." Shi Hongxian looked at him for a long time. Then, he personally lifted the teapot to pour tea for him and asked, "What way?" Shen Zichuan sipped his tea and said, "Let me see Ji Lei." Ji Lei had been tortured for days, and at present, he was in shackles as he lay in the prison with disheveled hair and bare feet. He heard someone walking over to open the prison door, then cover his head before dragging him out. Ji Lei was shoved up a horse carriage. After a while, he was dragged down and thrown to the ground. It was quiet all around, with only the sound of water dripping off the corners of the walls. Ji Lei crawled up from the ground and asked with a black fabric bag covering his head, "Who's there?" A water droplet splashed with a plop. No one responded. Ji Lei felt a chill on his back. Bracing himself with his arms, he probed tentatively, "Secretariat Elder Hai?" But still, no one answered. Ji Lei's Adam's apple throbbed. He shuffled forward on his knees and bumped into the bars. He fumbled around, steadied himself, and shouted, "If you aren't Secretariat Elder Hai, then you are Shuexiuzhua. How are you planning to torture me today? Bring it on. Say something. Why aren't you saying something? Who are you? Who exactly are you? What do you want to do? Do you think I'd be afraid if you don't talk? I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid." Ji Lei bent his head down between his arms to scrape the bag off. He moved his eyes and saw Shen Zichuan sitting in a chair right in front of him. Shen Zichuan was all dressed in bluish white, with one hand on the chair's armrest as he propped his head up to stare expressionlessly at Ji Lei. Laughter escaped from Ji Lei's throat. He grabbed the bars and squeezed his face in between the bars, then said in a low and deep voice, "Oh, it's you, the stray dog of Zhonghua. What does the vile beast want from your Shirshu? Revenge for Ji Gang, or revenge for yourself?" Shen Zichuan said nothing. The smile vanished from those tender, expressive eyes of his, leaving only a heavy and dark gaze behind. Ji Lei could not even find hatred in them. He felt as if that was not a man with flesh and blood sitting there, but a famished stray cur that had already started to feed on human flesh. Ji Lei lowered his eyes and said with hatred, "The Ji clan has no descendants, and the one who severed Ji Gang's bloodline is you. So what are you looking at me for? Shun Sichuan, it was your Shen clan who killed Jimu, and it was also your Shen clan who violated Hua Pingting. How do you face yourself having lived for so long? You are the devil beneath the tens of thousands of ghosts who died unjustly. You are the continuation of Shen Wei's ignoble existence. You deserve to be hacked to pieces." Ji Lei began to laugh softly. He looked demented. "Do you think I'll be afraid of you? The bastard whom nobody wants. You think taking off your pants to follow Shao the Second will give you better days ahead? Ha!" Shen Zichuan laughed too. Ji Lei's laughter gradually came to a stop. He said coldly, "Is that funny? My plight today will also be your predicament in the future." Shen Zichuan put down his leg and leaned against the chair like he was pondering it over. He said, "Oh, I'm so scared." His words were breezy with sarcasm the moment he opened his mouth. "Devil, bastard, stray dog, vile beast." Shen Zichuan rose to his feet and crouched outside the bars. He began to laugh at Ji Lei, and said in an insane yet restrained tone, "You're right, I'm all of them. I'm the devil who climbed my way out of the Chaucer sinkhole, the bastard Shen Wei left behind after he burned himself to death, the stray dog without a home to return to, and the vile beast reviled by thousands. Shirshu, I'm so delighted you know me so well." Ji Lei began to tremble uncontrollably. Shen Zichuan looked askance at him. His gaze was far more sinister and malicious than how it was back then. It was as if a man had already died under this layer of gorgeous skin, and all that survived was an unnamed beast. 5 years ago, Shen Zichuan drew closer to the bars and scrutinized Ji Lei's fearful expression. He said softly, "The one kneeling here was me. What was that you said to me the day you sent me into Zhao Zui Temple?" Ji Lei's throat and eyes tensed. He wanted to answer, but he could not voice it out. "I have been remembering everyone's kindness with gratitude," Shen Zichuan said piously. "Every day. Every night." Chapter 34. Interrogation. Chapter 34. Interrogation. You. What exactly are you? Ji Lei pressed himself against the bars, looked at Shen Zichuan's smile, and swiftly moved back. "What exactly are you up to? You're asking me?" Shen Zichuan said cheerfully. "You're asking me, huh?" Shen Zichuan's gaze turned malicious as he beckoned haughtily to Ji Lei. Ji Lei did not move. He leaned back against the wall and refused to budge even a fraction closer to Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan said, "Prisoners are all livestock waiting to be slaughtered. Shirshu, how dare you ask me?" Ji Lei countered, "What else can you do? Kill me? It's not often us uncle and nephew get the chance to meet. There's not even enough time for us to play, so how could I kill you so quickly?" Shen Zichuan slid his thumb across the bars and softened his tone. "You aren't saying a word because you feel that it's something you can exploit. With those secrets in your hands, no one would bear to lay their hands on you. Your days in prison become more comfortable, and you don't have to worry about food and clothing, nor fear for your life. There's Pan Rugi to accompany you, and you have plenty of leisure time. How carefree and happy." Ji Lei broke out in cold sweat. He stuck to the wall, no longer looking into Shen Zichuan's eyes. "But happy days are all fleeting. As long as the tongue is still there, it's not a big deal if a leg is missing, an arm is broken, or both eyes are gouged out. A few months ago, Shirshu treated me to donkey roast. I didn't get to taste it at that time. But now that the night is long, it's a good time to dine with wine." Shen Zichuan slipped the thin blade out between his fingers and tapped it between the bars. He said, "Ji Lei, time to serve you up to go with my wine. You are insane." Ji Lei stretched his neck out and enunciated each word. "Shen Zichuan, you're insane." "I'm insane." Shen Zichuan stared at him and answered in the affirmative. "How would you dare to lay a hand on me?" Ji Lei said furiously, Your life is in the Empress Dowager's hands. How would you dare to even touch a strand of my hair? Shin Zichuan cheered up again and said with a smile, Shu, why do you always have to keep saying such hilarious words tonight? Who else do you think sent me here? Enraged, Ji Lei said, Don't even think of hoodwinking, Shin Wei is dead. Shin Zichuan quickly cut off Ji Lei's words. The day Shin Wei set himself on fire, I heard that the prince of Jianxing Manor in Dunzhou was ablaze in raging flames. He was burned beyond recognition when the imperial bodyguards dragged him out of the ruins and hung him atop Dunzhou city walls to be reviled by all. I didn't see that scene with my own eyes, but I kept attempting to imagine it over the years. After turning it over in my mind, I finally realized something. Ji Lei swallowed his saliva. His grand plan to collude with the enemy has succeeded. Isn't defecting right before the battle much better for him? Duanzhou had already fallen into the enemy's hands. If he led his troops forth to receive and welcome them, he could join the Biancha cavalry and hurry to take down Kudu before the Libei armored cavalry crossed the river of ice. However, he was so scared that he recoiled from advancing and only dared to retreat. Shin Zichuan stood up. He had already succeeded. It's only by advancing that he would have a chance to survive. But he kept withdrawing. Even if he was a good-for-nothing, he should have known that retreating would only lead him to his doom. Ji Lei's breathing intensified as he said in loathing, because he didn't dare. Who in the Biancha 12 tribes would give him a damn? He was already a dead man the moment he colluded with the enemy. Shin Zichuan threw an eastern pearl into the cage, and the tumbling pearl knocked into the edge of the cage and rolled its way to Ji Lei's feet. Shin Zichuan scrutinized Ji Lei's face as the color gradually drained from it. He smiled. Ji Lei's hands trembled. He stared at that eastern pearl and said with difficulty, No. Impossible, Emperor Xianda is dead. Shin Zichuan leaned over and said, So is Shin Wei. Ji Lei suddenly kicked away the eastern pearl and said, Cunning lad, don't even think of tricking me. Shin Zichuan said happily, Hua Xiqian has committed suicide by biting off his tongue. Who will be the next one? You or Pan Rugi? Shall we draw lots? Sure, you first. With that, he spun out 2 more thin blades between his fingers and presented them before Ji Lei through the gap. If it's chipped, we'll kill Pan Rugi. If it isn't, then we'll feed all of your flesh and blood to the dogs. Don't be afraid. Draw one. Ji Lei looked at the cold glint of the thin blade. His lips opened and closed. He said, What nonsense are you spouting? The Empress Dowager instructed me to be quick. Shin Zichuan stared at him. Yet I gave you the opportunity to choose. Sure, there's a chance for things to turn for the better for each day you live. Ji Lei was already in a daze, having been tortured for days. And now, under this bizarre atmosphere, Shin Zichuan's words confused him until he could not tell the truth from lies. He fixed his eyes on those 2 thin blades. Finally, and curiously enough, he raised his hand. When his trembling fingers touched the thin blade, he saw Shin Zichuan slowly lifting the corners of his lips. Oh! Shin Zichuan smiled regrettably. I forgot that the blades I've brought along today are all new blades. The chipped ones have already been disposed of. The shame of being played instantly overwhelmed Ji Lei. Losing control of himself, he threw himself forward and shouted hysterically as he yanked at the bars, Do it if you want to kill me or cut me to pieces. I'll not say a word of what you want to know. Kill me, kill me! Wrong. Shin Zichuan remained in firm control of the atmosphere. I'm not the one who wants to kill you. You are. Ji Lei dug his fingers into the bars. You are. Am I? Shin Zichuan gently nudged over the eastern pearl that had rolled out and stepped on it. He looked at him coldly and asked again, Am I? Ji Lei held his head and tore at his unkempt hair. He slid down the bars to his knees and repeated over and over again, You are. You are the one, Shin Zichuan suddenly said. Shin Wei killed the crown prince. Ji Lei raised his head to look at him in terror, as if he had plunged into an ice cave. He said, "You," Shen Zichuan said, "you and Shen Wei killed the crown prince." "It wasn't me." Ji Lei clutched at his hair. "It wasn't me. The one who killed the crown prince was Shen Wei. You conspired with him to frame the crown prince for plotting a rebellion." Shen Zichuan said quickly, "You were the one who forged the document. You forced the crown prince into Zhao Zui temple. He wanted to see Emperor Guangqing, but you drew your blade and killed him." "It wasn't me." Ji Lei had already gone crazy. He refuted vehemently in the face of Shen Zichuan's chaotic interrogation. "I wasn't the one who drew the blade. It was Shen Wei. It was Shen Wei who insisted on killing him. That's why Shen Wei is dead." Shen Zichuan circled back and repeated, "Shen Wei set himself on fire and was burned beyond recognition. You are the only one left now." This succession of insinuations pushed Ji Lei into such a corner that all he could think of was the word, death. He thought back clearly to the former crown prince's face when he was killed. At that time, he had stood in the spot where Shen Zichuan was now standing and looked down at the crown prince from above, as if he was looking at swine. Now, by some act of ingenuity, his position had been reversed. The cage gave him the misconception that he was akin to a beast. He had become the ant one under Shen Zichuan's foot. All he could do was to crane his neck out and wait to be slaughtered. Tu Ji Lei did not want to die. His desire to survive had never been so strong. He banged his forehead against the bars and said, "We are all just following orders. We had no choice." "You want to avenge Shen Wei? I can help you." Shen Wei killed the crown prince and was conferred the title of Prince of Jianxing. He subsequently went to Zhongbua. He fled. Ji Lei cut a sorry figure as he started to choke with sobs. He had no idea where this fear came from either. It was as if he had really turned into a livestock at the mercy of others. All he could do was to raise his head and look at Shen Zichuan. "I didn't kill the crown prince. I wanted to save him. But father suddenly died." Ji Lei said helplessly, "Father died and they want to frame me for it. If I took the rap for it, eldest brother would kill me and so would Ji Gang. What could I do? I could only beg Pan Rugi for help. If Pan Rugi were to protect me, then I had to forge the documents. I was forced into that situation. I wanted to live too." "How did Ji Wufan die?" Shen Zichuan asked out of the blue. "I don't know. I don't know how father died. Father fell ill because Ji Gang left. The sons he favored had all left." At this point, Ji Lei turned malevolent again. He hated them so much. "I was the one who was with him in his last moments and the one who conducted funeral rites for him. Yet he said my core was rotten." He regarded Ji Gang and Zhuo Qianqiu as his own sons and passed the mental cultivation techniques to both of them. "But my surname is Ji too, and I didn't even do anything. So how could he treat me in such a way?" Shen Wei couldn't sleep at night after killing the crown prince. He was afraid. When we were drinking, he told me that he had gradually come to sense someone watching him. In his residence, he could even hear someone moving on the roof in the middle of the night. I told him it wasn't the imperial bodyguards. But in this kudu, is there anything that could hide from the eyes of the imperial bodyguards? I presumed there were traitors in the imperial bodyguards. Men from the 8 great clans were everywhere. The Hua clan was already in power, so we were careful. But Shen Wei's insomnia worsened. He wanted to flee. Thus, he bribed Pan Rugi with a lot of money, hoping to leave Kudu. At that time, Li Bei was a rising force to be reckoned with. The Empress Dowager had no other military forces other than the 8 great training divisions. In order to guard against the Shao clan, Shen Wei was conferred the title of the Prince of Jianxing. He went to Zhongbua, a large prefecture where the only routes between Qidong and Libei and Kudu would pass through. The Empress Dowager wanted him to be her watchdog with his eyes on Libei and Qidong. Ji Lei spoke more and more urgently. Who would have expected Shen Wei to collude with the enemy? He was asking for death. He had the documents with his correspondences with Kudu. Once the documents fell into Libai armored cavalry's hands, Xiao Jiming would not miss the opportunity to deal Kudu a heavy blow. So Shen Wei had to burn himself to death. Do you understand now? Shen Wei colluded with the enemy. He was no longer willing to be under the control of others. Back then, the Hua clan had a son of common birth. Going by the Empress Dowager's intent, once this child of common birth grew up, outsiders would no longer be needed to keep an eye on Zhongbua. Shen Wei had committed so many evil deeds in Kudu for the Hua clan. If Zhongbua no longer needed him, then he would be but a useless chess piece 3 of the Empress Dowager. No one anticipated him to take desperate measures after being driven into a corner and let the Bianxia cavalry in to massacre the cities. This was vengeance. This was his revenge on Kudu, on the Empress Dowager, and on Dezhou. Jilei grasped the bars and pleaded. I've said all I have to say. The Empress Dowager was the one who forced Shen Wei to his death. She was also the one who forced the Crown Prince to his death. And Emperor Guangqing, Emperor Xianda, Hua Xiqian, they were all the Empress Dowager's sacrificial chess pieces. And now you are carrying out jobs for the Empress Dowager. Look at me. I didn't tell her that you have already thrown in your lot with the Xiao clan. You saved Xiaoqia that night, didn't you? But the Xiao clan will not help you. As long as Xiaoqia is in Kudu, the Xiao clan cannot make their move. They can hardly look after themselves, so how would they care about you? He wanted to prove his usefulness, but his fear kept intensifying. His crumbling line of defense left him utterly defeated. The more inferior he felt, the more scared he became. Shen Zichuan asked him his last question through the bars. 5 years ago, my Shenyang died when Duanzhou fell into the enemy's hands. No one knows about this matter, so how are you so clear about it? Ji Lei looked at the expression in Shen Zichuan's eyes. In that dead silence, a drop of sweat slowly trickled down. Shi Hongxian waited until he fell asleep. It was not until a stack of paper was thrown onto his body that he jolted awake. He took the papers and shook it open for a look in the dark and saw the vividly red fingerprints at the bottom. He let out an obscure laugh and said, "You sure are good." There was a slight saltish stench on Shen Zichuan's body. He smiled for a moment, then said, "Whether or not this confession can be submitted to the top depends on how Secretariat Elder Hai views it." "That's some great favor you did," Shi Hongxian said. "Surely you didn't help for nothing? There's a man named Xiao Tianya in the Imperial Bodyguards. He's good with the broadsword. I want him," Shen Zichuan said calmly. "Not a problem." Shi Hongxian hesitated for a while. "I'll talk to Yanqing. Thank you for the trouble." Shen Zichuan said, "It's late now. I should go." With that, he opened the door and took his leave. It was raining in the night outside. Shi Hongxian wanted to call out to Shen Zichuan to get onto the horse carriage so that they could leave together. But then he had a thought and changed his mind. He flipped through the confession to look through it once, feeling that it had all gone too smoothly. As Shi Hongxian was thinking that he had to show Xue Xiuzhua this confession first, he said to the attendant at the side, "Go. Drag Ji Lei out and send him back." The attendant acknowledged his order and went to open the door. He had only just strode in when he fell to the ground on his butt with a loud clatter and screamed as though he had seen a ghost. Shi Hongxian followed the open door and saw Ji Lei. His stomach churned, and he covered his face to retreat, desperately knocking aside the table and chairs as he dashed into the rain to throw up violently. Shen Zichuan washed his hands until they reddened before he wiped them with a handkerchief. There were no blood stains on his white outfit, but there was the lingering stench of blood. He picked up the front of his clothes and frowned as he sniffed it. What a stink! Shen Zichuan squatted under the rain by the edge of the water. Very quickly, the night rain drenched him. He slowly raised his head and gazed at the pitch-black sky until his neck was sore. Then, He rose to his feet and walked back. When Shen Zichuan reached the alley of the Imperial Army's residence, he saw a man standing at the entrance. Xiao Qia was leaning against the door in the dark with folded arms, staring at him like a cheetah. At some point, snow had begun to fall with the rain, making one feel damp and cold to the bone. Chapter 35. First Snow. Chapter 35. First snow. The chill was bitingly cold as the wind blew at their sleeve. Right at this time, Shen Zichuan suddenly turned his head and sneezed, dispelling the confrontation that was on the verge of erupting. He was soaking wet as he waved his hand at Xiao Qia and said in a muffled voice, "Have a handkerchief?" Xiao Qia strode a step forward and handed him one. The tip of Shen Zichuan's nose had been frozen red, even his fingertips were red. He took the blue handkerchief and covered his mouth and nose. It was only then Xiao Qia unhurriedly opened up the umbrella. Without making way for Shen Zichuan, he asked, "Where did you go?" Shen Zichuan replied, "To play. In any case, you're my guard. You have to inform the office when you head out to play." Xiao Qia said, "It's really worrying if you run off without so much a word. I left my waist token in the bathhouse. Did the second young master not see it?" Shen Zichuan sniffed the scent on the handkerchief. It smelled rather good, not the usual incense customarily used by the nobles, but more like the surging waves of strong, valiant wind under the scorching sun. It was the scent on Xiao Qia. What a nice smell! Shen Zichuan lowered his eyes, almost fascinated by this scent. This was the sunlight beyond his reach, the spirit he no longer possessed in this life. A part of him did not want to return the handkerchief, thus he raised the corners of his eye to glance at Xiao Qia out of the corners of his eyes, looking as if he had something to say but was hesitant to. "Nope, didn't see it." Xiao Qia felt around his chest but did not touch the object he was looking for. He turned his eyes just in time to see Shen Zichuan's gaze on him. Taken aback, he said, "What conscienceless deed have you done for you to look at me in such a way?" "Who knows?" Shen Zichuan said a little smugly to him. "I've done plenty. Let's hear a couple." Xiao Qia said, "A heart-to-heart talk in the night should be done inside the house. It's rather cold to be standing here." Shen Zichuan coughed and said, "Is the bathhouse still open?" "Closed." Xiao Qia replied, "You can only go to my room if you want to take a bath. Your health is so bad. Should I call for a physician to take a look for you?" "That'd be great." Shen Zichuan countered his move. "With the second young master stepping in, I'll get to save on consultation fees. You have yet to recover from a major illness, and running around all over only makes it even more worrying. I'll get someone to follow you in the future." Xiao Qia chivalrously made way for him. "Let's go. Second young master will hold up the umbrella for you and send you there." Shen Zichuan looked at Xiao Qia's shoulder, which was even taller than his own self, then looked at him again. He smiled and said, "I can stand on tiptoe to hold up the umbrella too. I'm afraid of veils." One Xiao Qia's side profile was tasteful, with a straight nose and a nice silhouette. He said, "You're too short." Shen Zichuan strode through the main entrance with him and said, "You're really the one who's too tall. When I was young, I was a few heads shorter than my age, and with such a name to boot. It made me anxious, so I trained hard in martial arts every day and made it a habit to drink milk before going to bed." Xiao Qia strode over the puddle of water with his long legs and continued, "Who would have expected my height to shoot through the roof when I was 13 or 14? Ain't that great?" Shen Zichuan said, "My Dage was very tall too." The rain receded, but the snow intensified. Xiao Qia raised the brim of the umbrella to gaze at the snow and said, "It's yet another year." Shen Zichuan gazed at the snow too and echoed, "Yet another year." The new emperor ascended to the throne and granted amnesty to all. Xiao Qia paused. "The Empress Dowager's power and influence have weakened. You can leave Kudu and go anywhere you want. Then conceal my name to live incognito, forget my past, and remain a mediocre person for my entire lifetime." Shen Zichuan said mildly. This isn't something a man who hates me should say. I hate the Biancha cavalry, Xiao Qie said coldly. I hate Xin Wei too. Shun Zichuan said, You should hate me. Xiao Qie's eyes stirred. Shun Zichuan continued, I'm a man who lives on hatred. Snowflakes fell upon the stone slabs and melted in a twinkling of an eye. Xiao Qie said, The current you understand those words from 5 years ago best. Living is much more painful than dying. Shun Zichuan suddenly laughed. He exhaled and said to Xiao Qie, That's not right. I'm not in pain. Hatred itself is death by dismemberment. It's like a knife gouging out your flesh, day after day. Anyone would eventually become numb. There's nothing else in this world that can make me feel pain again. I feel comfortable living like this. You've repeatedly advised me to drop the matter, but you yourself understand it best that stopping has never been something you and I have the luxury of choosing. If warmth and tenderness can make you feel better, then I don't mind playing on for longer. Shun Zichuan raised his hand as he spoke and drew that icy finger across Xiao Qie's sturdy back. He said in what seemed to be a whisper, There are some things that are vividly beautiful when seen through the mist, but when you take a closer look, they are just a pile of dead men's bones. Xiao Qie waited for him to retract his hand before shaking his umbrella impatiently. He said, Dead men's bones won't touch people like this. Shun Zichuan smiled and was just about to stride forward when Xiao Qie grasped him around the shoulder. You sure have guts, Xiao Qie wrapped his arm tightly around his shoulder, to touch your second young master while you are reeking so heavily of blood. Over 10 men in the courtyard can't even keep an eye on you, so what room are you returning to? Just sleep with me. Shun Zichuan was caught off guard. Xiao Qie said, The favor you did me by saving my life has always been on my mind, and I've repeatedly given you chances. Yet you just have to treat me like some kind of fool to coax. Is it that delightful to keep teasing me? If so, then why aren't you smiling? Shun Lanzhao, come on, didn't you say you don't mind playing on for longer? As soon as he said that, he tossed away the umbrella, strode a step over, and simply hoisted Shun Zichuan over his shoulder. A wave of dizziness washed over Shun Zichuan with his head dangling down. He immediately covered his nose and mouth with the handkerchief and fumed. Xiao Qie said, If you dare to move, then I'll dare to turn Kudu upside down immediately to see who's the one who collaborated with you from the inside and outside to kill someone in the middle of the night. Go investigate then. The moment Shun Zichuan opened his mouth, Xiao Qie gave him a jerk so hard that he almost threw up. Look at how fast you flee when there's a hole in the bathhouse for you to dig your way through. With Shun Zichuan over his shoulder, Xiao Qie leaped over the railing and passed through the courtyard with withering greenery. He swiftly made his way through the Moon Gate 3 and headed right for his own room. The sprawling man shadowing them on the rooftop poked his head out for a look and clicked his tongue in wonder. He was still smiling and chatting in the snow earlier, looking all courteous and refined. Why the sudden urgency? That guy doesn't want to be with second young master, okay? The guard who was always watching Shun Zichuan took a gulp of his Xiaojiu wine and continued. He fled so fast yesterday likely because he was afraid the second young master would force himself on him tonight. I went to the Imperial Army to ask around this afternoon. Everyone all knows about this matter. Do we report this to the hereditary prince? The one who had poked out his head to look around fished out a little book, licked his brush, and pondered over it. Ugh, this isn't going to be easy to write. He carried him into the room so brazenly. The one drinking wine took a few glances. Xiao Qie had already kicked the door close with a bang. He thought for a moment, then said, Or let's just not. Being a Homo 5 can't be said to be a major issue, but it isn't a minor one either. It'd be tough to explain to both sides if we say it wrong. The second young master will get a beating. The other one frowned and drew a few strokes, then said, Well, then I'll just record it but not report it yet. If the hereditary prince comes to settle scores later, We'll just say we buckled under the second young master's abuse of power 6 and did not dare to report it without grounds. But how on earth did he escape? The one drinking wine pillowed his head on his arms, still unable to fathom it. There was a heater in the room. Xiao Chai did not release Shen Zichuan, but looped an arm around his waist as he circled around the room to rummage through his clothing chest. There's more than enough hot water. Feel free to pick the fragrances 7 and bath beans 8 as you like. As Xiao Qie spoke, he turned his head aside to sniff openly at Shen Zichuan's waist. He said, "You are not the kind of person who needs to bathe in milk and flower petals and pearl powder, 9 are you?" Shen Zichuan said, "Put. I'm going to puke." "Then puke the way you are now." Xiao Qie took out the clothes stowed away at the bottom of the chest and closed the chest. Ignoring the mess of clothes dangling out through the closed gap, he took Shen Zichuan further inside. He lifted the hanging screen. There were 2 small sections of space separated by a screen inside. One side led to hot water, while the other side was a clothes rack. Xiao Qie hung the attire up on the rack and easily shifted the screen away with one arm. Then he placed Shen Zichuan by the edge of the pool and dragged a chair over with his leg. "Take your bath." Xiao Qie sat without inhibitions and raised his chin at Shen Zichuan. "Everything you need is all prepared. I'll see how you run." Shen Zichuan's face turned white as he asked in astonishment, "You watching?" Xiao Qie stretched out his long legs and folded his arms. He said, "You shy? Don't run, okay? I'm afraid the one who's shy isn't me." Shen Zichuan retorted sarcastically. "Then, go ahead and strip." Xiao Qie was calm and unruffled. "Let's see which of us throw in the towel first." Without saying another word, Shen Zichuan pulled his waist belt open. Xiao Qie looked right at him without the slightest intent to avert his eyes. By the time Shen Zichuan stripped to his inner garment, his knuckles had already turned white. "Whether you are in pain or not, I don't know," Xiao Qie teased him. "But from the looks of it, you're pretty angry." He had not even finished his words when Shen Zichuan's clothes were tossed onto his face. Xiao Qie grabbed the clothes and smiled for a moment. By the time he removed them from his face, Shen Zichuan had already entered the water. Shen Zichuan leaned over on the other side without turning or looking back. Water droplets condensed on that fair and smooth back of his. It was so silky and moist it looked like jade petals with dew. Xiao Qie sat for a moment, then said, "What a short temper. Don't you always have a way with your words in the past?" Shen Zichuan said, "Not as hardcore as the second young master." 11 Never mind if he used such a double entendre for the first time. But after saying it several times, whatever bit of bashfulness Xiao Qie had was all but snuffed out by him. So, he remained firmly seated and answered with composure, "Of course." After a moment, Xiao Qie probed, "Aren't you going to tell me where you went to play tonight?" "You're omnipotent," Shen Zichuan said. "Go check it out yourself. There are a few places where you can get to kill people at this time." Xiao Qie took the Eastern Pearl out of Shen Zichuan's clothes and pinched it between his fingertips to size it up. He said, "The Empress Dowager is still rich. Things are already at such a stage, and she still has to put on such an ostentatious display when sending secret messages. You couldn't have been dazzled silly by this pearl and set your heart on being her lackey because of it, could you?" "Who doesn't love money?" Shen Zichuan said. "Even though His Majesty favors you and trusts you now, you still have to make up for the Imperial Army's equipment shortfall. You know better than me the benefits of having money." "She told you to kill someone," Xiao Qie said, "and you simply went to kill?" Shen Zichuan had already soaked enough and reached a hand out for his clothes. But Xiao Qie used his leg to hook the clothes rack away. He got up and said, "Answer me." Bare-chested, Shen Zichuan said, "Yeah." "Liar." Xiao Qie stretched out his hand to take down the clean clothes and said to Shen Zichuan, "This pearl had been soaked rotten that night. How could you have been able to see the Empress Dowager's instructions clearly?" The person you killed tonight is someone you wanted to kill, am I right? Shen Zichuan said. Don't me. Xiao Qie caressed the fabric. An ambiguous answer is equivalent to no answer. It's someone I want to kill. Shen Zichuan reached out a hand. You got it right. Ji Lei. Xiao Qie said, or Pan Rugi? Shen Zichuan's fingertips had already reached the clothes. He said, why can't it be you? There was a swish as the clothing was lifted high. Refusing to give it to him, Xiao Qie said, just an exchange of a few words and you've changed your tone. Second young master doesn't buy sarcasm. Whether you kill Ji Lei or Pan Rugi, the Court of Judicial Review will definitely not let the matter drop tomorrow morning. You saved my life during the autumn hunt. The Empress Dowager doesn't know about this yet, but I can let her know. Once she finds out, you'll be my man even if you aren't now. So speak properly and don't tease your second young master for fun. Each time Shen Zichuan attempted to reach for the clothes, Xiao Qie would raise it high. Shen Zichuan put up with it again and again until he finally rose from the water to grab the clothes. He fumed, speak properly while I'm naked? Xiao Qie leaned in for a closer look and said, see, this is what I mean by speaking properly. Why put on an enigmatic dead men's bones act before me? Ghost stories can't scare me. Having said that, he paused for a moment. Since you've touched me, I'd have to touch back. We aren't on that good of a term for me to be nonchalant about it. So, where do I touch? Chapter 36, Scent. Chapter 36. Scent. Shen Zichuan suddenly imitated Xiao Qie's action from the last time and splashed water droplets onto his face, then seized the chance to grab the clothes from his hand. Unable to open his eyes from the spray of water, Xiao Qie reached out an arm to pull off a dry towel. He covered it over Shen Zichuan's head and rubbed it at random. Shen Zichuan was still putting on his clothes, and Xiao Qie's rubs sent half of his body swaying. Seething with hate, he used his bare leg to kick out at the latter's chair. With the chair under Xiao Qie's but pushed back from the kick, Xiao Qie immediately stretched out his legs, clamped them around Shen Zichuan tightly, and forcibly dragged the latter towards him. Then he continued to rub Shen Zichuan's head, as if he was wiping down a puppy. In that case, I'll do as I please. Xiao Qie snapped. As you son of air. The towel rubs caused Shen Zichuan's voice to break up intermittently. Xiao Qie pulled off the towel. Without saying another word, he pinched Shen Zichuan's chin with one hand, while his other hand slid down along Shen Zichuan's nape to his waist and hip. Son of a bitch. Xiao Qie said, did you call me a son of a bitch? Shen Zichuan's waist belt was not properly secured, and the outfit on his body was Xiao Qie's old clothes. Thus, it hung loosely on his body, exposing his collarbones. The water droplets on his body wetted Xiao Qie's fingertips as the latter moved his hand down, blending into one with that satiny touch. I didn't say that. Shen Zichuan backhandedly pressed down on Xiao Qie's hand to hold it in place. As they say, one should reflect daily on 3 aspects. 1 second young master, you should really do some reflection. You don't understand. Xiao Qie's nimble fingers turned over to grasp Shen Zichuan's hand instead. The first word I knew of was, son of a bitch. I've long told you that your second young master is a jerk. There's absolutely no need for me to reflect. And isn't this waist of yours too slender? It's you who have touched too little. Shen Zichuan said callously. That's right. Xiao Qie pretended not to understand and wandered into another direction. I naturally haven't touched your waist that many times. Shen Zichuan had no wish to put on a show with him any longer. He tightened his waist belt with one hand and said, since you have touched me back, then this matter is closed. Xiao Qie released his legs that were wrapped around Shen Zichuan, and Shen Zichuan fastened his waist belt. Even his face had turned red from the rubs Xiao Qie was giving him with a handkerchief. Feeling hot, Xiao Qie rose to pick up the eastern pearl on the ground and happened to see Shen Zichuan's bare legs again. It dazed him for a moment, then he swiftly straightened up and took 2 steps back before pressing in another 2 steps. He said, "Sleep." Shinzichuan poured a bowl of hot ginger soup. After rinsing his mouth, he sneezed again. Xiao Qie found the way he looked when he sneezed amusing, just like a cat. He soaked the handkerchief with cold water and wiped his face. "Don't go that way." Xiao Qie undressed and pointed to his bed. "You sleep in my bed." Shinzichuan wiped his mouth and said, "Then I won't stand on ceremony." He dispensed with the formalities and sat on Xiao Qie's bed. Xiao Qie shifted the tables and chairs away, and then dragged the shumi couch 2 in the room to the vacated spot about the distance of a stepping block away from Shinzichuan. He rolled over to lie down, then pillowed his head on both arms and said, "Lan Zhou, extinguish the lamp." Shinzichuan blew the lamp out and lifted his blanket to lie down with his back facing Xiao Qie. It was still snowing outside, but the inside of the room was warm and quiet. Xiao Qie shut his eyes, looking as if he was sleeping. The sensation of touching Shinzichuan lingered on his fingertips, and it was becoming more and more vivid at this time in the darkness. Xiao Qie opened his eyes to stare at the roof, and began to think about the skies in Libei. It's only when one is without desires that one can become a sage. When his Shifu taught him to hold the bow, it happened to be the season when the pastures of Libei were luxuriant. He had sat on the fence at the edge of the horse ranch and looked up at the azure blue sky with his head propped up with his hands. Zhuoqianqiu had asked, "What are you thinking?" Hanging around Xiao Qie's neck was the bone thumb ring. He swung his calves and said, "I want an eagle. Shifu, I want to fly." Zhuoqianqiu sat on one side and looked at him. He patted the back of his head and said, "You are also a lad burning with desires. But in this world, it's only when one is without desires that one can become a sage. There are many matters that will end up being your cage once you harbor the desire for it." Restless, Xiao Qie grasped hold of the railing with both hands and swiftly hung upside down from it, his little robe covering his face in tufts of grass and dust. He said, "It's only human nature to want. Wanting is the prelude to joy and misery." Zhuoqianqiu carried his own great bow in his arms and wiped it carefully. "If you acknowledge that you are but a mortal with desires, then you will be swayed by considerations of gain and loss. If you want it, you must get it. You will be a little wolf with such a character. But Yi, there will be many things in the future that you want but will never get. What should you do then?" Xiao Qie landed on the grass. He grabbed at the hem of his robe and caught hold of a big locust. He pinched the struggling locust and said half-heartedly, "Father said, where there is a will, there is a way, there is nothing that can't be obtained." Zhuoqianqiu sighed, thinking he was still too young after all. So he helplessly pointed to the sky and said, "All right. You want to fly, but can you really fly?" Xiao Qie released the locust and raised his head to look at Zhuoqianqiu. He said in all seriousness, "I can learn how to tame eagles. Once I tamed one, then its wings will belong to me. The sky it flies past will be the sky I fly past. Shifu, a man has to be adaptable." Zhuoqianqiu looked at him for a long time before he said, "You are stronger than me. I'm a fool who can't adapt to circumstances." Imitating an eagle, Xiao Qie spread his arms open and ran a few steps on the grass in the wind. He said, "I want to tame a horse too. Eagles and horses are both strong-willed creatures." Zhuoqianqiu followed after him and said, "Looks like our likes people who are recalcitrant and hard to tame." "Taming," Xiao Qie said, "that's the kind of process I like." Xiao Qie thought. It was not that he liked such a process. He enjoyed it. He was fascinated by it. It was just like torturing an eagle. He would not let the eagle sleep for 7 days, and not feed it for 4. He would hang it until the feathers on the top of its head puffed up, and torture it until its eyes were comparable to that of sesame seeds. Only when it obeyed his orders that he could take it out for hunting. And now, sexual desire was his newly acquired eagle. Xiao Qie tilted his head slightly and looked at Shin Zichuan's back. That slanted close revealed Shin Zichuan's nape. In the darkness, it was like a piece of unpolished jade that felt wonderful to the touch. Xiao Qie was hard again. Songji loves Liaoning at Kangji. Yet he did not move, nor did he look away. He did not believe that this kind of shallow lust could dominate him. He did not believe that he would succumb to this kind of crass instinct. Before dawn the next day, both men sat up in unison as if they finally have had enough of it. The guard who had been sprawling on the roof all night huffed out a breath of hot air and watched as the maidservants entered the room in a single file. He said, nothing happened last night. The one drinking wine said, he didn't succeed. The one holding the brush asked suspiciously, and you know that how? The one drinking wine shifted his body and watched as Shin Zichuan stepped out of the door. He said, look at him. He's moving as per normal today. Other than the black circles under his eyes, he clearly looked rested. Both men systematically turned their heads as their eyes followed Shin Zichuan. Then they looked back at Xiao Qie, who had just stepped out. The one holding the brush said, second young master doesn't look too happy. The one drinking wine said, he's sex-deprived. Chen Yang draped a coat around Xiao Qie. Seeing his grave expression, he said, Viceroy, did he screw something up? Xiao Qie replied, you could say so. Alarmed, Chen Yang said, last night he's pretty proficient in feigning sleep. Xiao Qie secured Longli blade and braved the snow to descend the stairs. Let's go. To the military drill grounds at Mount Feng. Chen Yang chased up to him and said, there's no one on duty today. And it's snowing. Viceroy, Xiao Qie flipped atop the horse and lowered his voice. I'm going to see the new equipment that has just arrived. Tell Gu Jin and Ding Tao to keep an eye on him. Chen Yang nodded. Xiao Qie raised his head and shouted to the two men on the roof. If you lose him again, both of you can scram too. The two heads that had popped out from the rooftop gave a uniform nod and shrank back again. Ding Tao put the brush and book properly back in his bosom and said, this is just great. We have turned from second young master's guards into his guards. Gu Jin shook what was left of his wine and said, I feel that he can fight 8 men on his own. We'll just keep an eye on him. Just keep an eye on him. Ding Tao readied himself, then placed both hands mannerly on his knees. After sitting for a while, he said, but where is he? Both men looked at each other, then rose at the same time and said, shit. Eating his steamed bun, Shin Zichuan opened the back door to Zhao Zui Temple. Ji Gang was shadowboxing in the courtyard. When he saw him coming, he wiped his sweat with a towel and asked, why are you here today? Shin Zichuan replied, I'll be busy in a few days. It's convenient today. Grand Mentor Qi was sleeping among a stack of papers. His snores boomed like thunder, so Shin Zichuan and Ji Gang did not enter the house but sat under the eaves to chat. Wiping his face, Ji Gang asked, you didn't use your martial arts lately, did you? Shin Zichuan lifted his sleeve up to reveal the bruises, courtesy of the sparring with Xiao Qie the day before. He said, I fought once with Xiao Er. Ji Gang was stunned, then he flew into a rage. He actually dared to hit you? My guess is that he wants to see my internal martial arts. For Shin Zichuan put down his sleeve and said, Shifu, he's truly blessed by heaven. His physique is a notch better than the Prince of Libei. I countered his blows with the Ji clan's boxing style, but it was just like an ant trying to shake a tree. 5 I couldn't move him at all. Back then, Zhuo Qianxiu left the capital to head to Suotian Pass, where he met Suotian Pass's Feng Yixing. Ji Gang said, Feng Yixing took in Zhuo Qianxiu as his adopted son and imparted the Feng clan's art of broadsword to him. By the time it was imparted down to Xiao II, it has probably already become a skill that incorporates a blend of martial arts from various schools, thus differing from us. But the Ji clan's style naturally has the Ji clan's strength. If you can truly have a match with him on broadsword techniques alone, then you will be able to compare the differences. Longley blade was forged by a famous craftsman on Commander-in-Chief Chi's payroll. It slices through metal like cutting through mud. Common blades are useless when facing up against it. Shun Zichuan said thoughtfully. The blades forged by the Qi clan's craftsmen are all General's broadsword, specially designed for combat on the battlefield. Look at Shao II's Longley blade. If it can make an appearance on the battlefield, it would be able to split human bones with one straight slash. It was entirely made to fit the arm's strength of that lad. As Ji Gang spoke, he stamped the snow off his shoes. As for us, we might not necessarily get used to wielding it even if we have the chance to. But you don't have to worry about your blade. Shifu has already found one for you. My blade. Shun Zichuan was slightly taken aback. The Imperial Bodyguards is a good place. Ji Gang smiled at him. The amount of time you've been there is still short, but you will slowly come to understand in the future that it's a place full of hidden talents in Dazhou. Qi Juin may have a famous craftsman, but we have no lack of them in the Imperial Bodyguards either. I keep thinking of that blade of Ji Lei. Once Shifu brings you that blade and hands it to an old friend to reforge, it will be no less inferior to Shao II's Longley blade. Isn't Ji Lei's blade Xiuchuan blade? 6. Xiuchuan blade is the blade he generally carries along with him, but he also has my father's blade hidden in his collection. Ji Gang said with a snort. Why isn't he dead yet? Once the Court of Judicial Review sentences him, that blade will be sealed into the armory. As long as it is in there, Shifu will have a way. He has been tortured for such a long time, Shin Zichuan said softly. He won't be able to endure it for much longer. Did you find the person I asked you to find before the autumn hunt? Ji Gang remembered this matter and hastened to ask. I've found him. Shin Zichuan smiled. I'm just waiting for him to come out. Shao Qie did not return even during dinner time, so Shin Zichuan rested in his own room. It was in the middle of the night when he heard hurried footsteps outside. Following right after, someone knocked on his door. Shin Zichuan wanted to pretend that he did not hear it when he heard a sound at the window. Shao Qie raised the window with his sheath and whistled at him. Meng landed on the edge of the window and tilted its head to look inside too. We agreed to sleep together. Shao Qie was not pleased. Why did you run back here again? Song Ji loves Lianin at Kangji. Net Shin Zichuan threw a pillow out of the window, and Shao Qie caught hold of it. So Shin Zichuan could only get up and hugged his blanket to open the door. Carrying his pillow in his arms, Shao Qie suddenly took a sniff and asked, Did you put on some fragrance? Shin Zichuan replied, I apply 10 catty 7 of rouge a day. Is that so? Shao Qie smiled and said. Shin Zichuan walked in front. With Shao Qie standing behind him, even the night wind could not blow onto Shin Zichuan. Sensing a coolness on his nape, Shin Zichuan swiftly looked back. Shao Qie scraped him with a finger, then sniffed his own finger a little dubiously. What is this scent on your body? Shao Qie wondered. A whiff. Shin Zichuan swung the blanket over Shao Qie's head and replied calmly, That's the smell of gunpowder on your own body. Shao Qie stood for a brief moment, then lifted the edge of the blanket with lightning speed and enveloped Shin Zichuan within it too. With his head protruding from the eaves, Ding Tao speedily fished out a small book and exclaimed in excitement, Way to go, second young master. You caught him.